Hey friends! Glad you're here at The Fiction Wizard. We've cooked up something special. What if Gringotts' ritual at age 8 revealed Harry was heir to every founder and true owner of Hogwarts Castle? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The blood doesn't lie. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old trainers and the particular kind of loneliness that settles into small spaces. Harry Potter had lived in it for as long as he could remember, which by age 8 was a considerable stretch of time, and he had learned to make it comfortable in the way that children learn to make anything comfortable, by deciding it was fine, that it was his, that the crack of light under the door was actually rather pleasant in the dark. He had a blanket. He had a torch he'd found behind the garden shed. He had 3 books that Dudley had thrown at him hard enough to bruise and then forgotten about, and Harry had read all 3 so many times that he could recite passages in his sleep. One was about spiders, which Aunt Petunia found disgusting, which made Harry like it considerably more. One was a battered atlas with half the pages stuck together. The third was a novel about a boy who discovered he was a prince, and Harry had stopped reading that one after the first chapter because something about it made his chest hurt in a way he couldn't explain. It was a Tuesday in late July when Mrs. Figg knocked on the door of number 4 Privet Drive, and Harry, pressed against the wall of the cupboard with his ear to the door, heard the conversation that would change everything. "I need to take the boy," Mrs. Figg said. Her voice was strange, tight and nervous in a way Harry had never heard from her. She smelled of cats and biscuits when she watched him, and she was kind enough in a distracted, guilty way, always feeding him slightly better than the Dursleys did and pretending not to notice when he read her books. "To London. Just for the day?" "Absolutely not," Aunt Petunia said. "Whatever for?" "Bank business." A pause. "His parents left an account. It needs attending to before the boy turns 9 or there are legal complications." Harry heard his uncle's heavy footsteps in the hallway. "Bank business," Vernon Dursley repeated, with the particular tone he used for anything that suggested the wizarding world existed. "What sort of bank?" "The sort," Mrs. Figg said quietly, "that sends very official letters to the guardians of neglected children when appointments are missed." The silence that followed was long and thick. "Fine," Petunia said. "Take him. Have him back by dinner." Harry was already sitting up straight in the dark, his heart going fast, by the time the cupboard door opened. Mrs. Figg looked down at him. In the thin light from the hallway she looked older than usual, and sad, and something else, something that might have been relief or might have been guilt dressed in relief's clothing. She had the expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was finally setting it down, and wasn't sure if her arms were strong enough for the walk home. "Get your shoes," she said. "I only have 1 pair," Harry said. "Then get them." He got them. He was in them in under 30 seconds. The journey to London was by bus, which Mrs. Figg paid for without explanation, and then by underground, where Harry pressed his face to the black window of the tunnel and watched his reflection and thought about bank accounts and parents he didn't remember. She bought him a sandwich from a cart at Charing Cross Station, proper ham, thick bread, a little mustard, and he ate it standing up on the platform because he didn't want to waste time sitting down. She watched him eat with that guilty expression still in place. "Did you know my parents?" he asked, between bites. "A little," she said. Were they nice?" She looked at him for a long moment. "They were extraordinary," she said, and then she looked away, and something in her voice told him the conversation was over. They walked down the Charing Cross Road until the buildings began to press together and the tourists thinned out and Mrs. Figg turned sharply into an alley that smelled of old brick and something metallic and alive, like copper and lightning mixed together. Harry's skin prickled. The air felt different here, denser, as if it had weight. There was a pub. The Leaky Cauldron, a sign read in letters that seemed to rearrange themselves when he tried to read them straight. Inside it was dark and smelled of ale and old wood and something smoky sweet that Harry couldn't identify. Several of the patrons looked up when he walked in, and a few of them went very still. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Don't," Mrs. Figg said, not loudly, but with considerable force, and the whispers stopped. They went through the back, through a brick wall that opened like a curtain when Mrs. Fig tapped it with a stick she produced from her cardigan pocket, and then they were in Diagon Alley, and Harry stopped walking. He'd felt it the moment the wall parted, a sensation like stepping into sunlight after a long winter, like something inside him that had been sleeping had opened one eye. The colors of the alley were brighter than they should have been. The sounds were cleaner. He could feel the cobblestones through the thin soles of his shoes, and the feeling went up through his bones in a way that was nearly musical, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "It's real," he said, which wasn't what he meant to say, but was somehow accurate. "It's real," Mrs. Fig agreed, with considerable understatement. He'd known, vaguely, that the world his aunt and uncle hated was his parents' world. He'd known it the way you know things you've been told to forget, in the dark part of yourself that keeps things anyway. But knowing it and standing in the middle of it with the sun on his face and the smell of dragon dung and fresh bread and something wonderful and strange in the air were different things entirely. He could have stood there for an hour. Mrs. Fig touched his shoulder. "Gringotts," she said. "We have an appointment." The bank was white marble and vast and cold in the way that very powerful things are cold, not unfriendly, just indifferent to whether you were comfortable or not. Goblins moved behind the long counters with the efficient precision of people who considered their work sacred and your impatience a personal insult. The ceiling was high enough that Harry tilted his head back and thought of cathedrals from his atlas, the ones with pages stuck together. Mrs. Fig spoke to a goblin at the front desk in a low voice. The goblin's expression shifted, fractionally, but Harry caught it, the tiny recalibration of something unexpected. The goblin looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Follow me," the goblin said. They were led not to one of the open counter stations but through a narrow corridor behind the main hall and into a room that smelled of stone and old parchment and something faintly electric. There was a desk of dark wood, 2 plain chairs on one side, and behind the desk, a goblin who was older than the others. Harry could tell by the depth of the lines in his face and the quality of the stillness in his dark eyes. Not the stillness of a man waiting. The stillness of a man who had learned to wait and had stopped minding it. "Sit," the goblin said. Harry sat. Mrs. Fig sat beside him, clutching her handbag. "I am Ragnok," the goblin said. "Senior account manager. I have managed the Potter accounts for the past decade." He looked at Harry the way someone looks at a document they've been studying for a long time and are seeing in person for the first time. "You are later than we expected." "I'm 8, Harry said. "You are 3 years late," Ragnok said, without apology. "The account flags itself at 5. We sent correspondence." "They wouldn't have given it to him," Mrs. Fig said quietly. Ragnok looked at her with the particular goblin expression that suggested he had suspected this and found it to be the precise variety of human foolishness that annoyed him most. "No," he said. "I imagine they wouldn't have." He opened a drawer and withdrew a small stone bowl, smooth and gray, and a slender silver instrument with a tiny blade at its tip. "We will begin with the inheritance right. It is standard procedure. Give me your hand." Harry held out his right hand without hesitation. "Most children flinch," Ragnok observed. "Does it hurt?" "A little." "Then flinching won't help." Something shifted in Ragnok's expression, not quite a smile, goblins don't do those easily, but a softening of the habitual severity. He took Harry's hand, pressed the silver tip to the pad of Harry's index finger, and made a small precise cut. 3 drops of blood fell into the bowl, which was already filled with a clear liquid that began to move when the blood touched it, swirling in patterns that had nothing to do with gravity. Then it turned gold. Ragnok went very still. "That's not," the young goblin by the door said, before Ragnok cut him off with a gesture. The gold deepened, darkened, and then began to produce a pattern on the surface of the liquid, names, titles, connections, written in a script that shifted between the old wizarding runes and something older still. Harry watched it happen with his chin up and his eyes calm, which was partly because he had no context for what was wrong and partly because, truthfully, it felt exactly right. The feeling from the alley, that opening sensation, that morning after winter warmth, it was the same feeling, but stronger, like something had stopped being a whisper and started being a voice. Ragnar read the parchment that the bowl produced. He read it once, set it down, and read it again. Then he looked at Harry for a long moment with the expression of a man doing rapid arithmetic. "What does it say?" Harry asked. "It says," Ragnar said carefully, "a great many things." He turned the parchment so Harry could see it. "Can you read the older script?" "No," Harry said, "but I can read the bits in English." The bits in English were sufficient. His name was at the top, Harrison James Potter, and beneath it, branching out in a network of lines and connections that covered the entire parchment, was a family tree that shouldn't have been possible. Potter. Black, through a connection 3 generations back. Peveril, which was its own category of impossible. And then, at the very bottom of the tree, in ink that was darker than the rest and seemed to pulse faintly, Heir of House Gryffindor. Heir of House Hufflepuff. Heir of House Ravenclaw. Heir of House Slytherin. And below even that, in script so old it was nearly pictographic, True Custodian. Castle bound. Hogwarts recognizes. Harry read it twice. He looked up at Ragnar. "Is this normal?" "No," Ragnar said. "This is not normal. This has not happened in 400 years. In point of fact," he said, in the tone of a man who is choosing his words with the same care he'd choose a step on an icy bridge, "as far as our records indicate, this has never happened at all." Mrs. Figg made a small, strangled sound beside Harry. Her hands were pressed flat on her thighs and her face had gone the color of old plaster. "Merlin," she breathed. "Greater, actually," Ragnar said, which, Harry would realize later, was the closest a goblin had ever come to making a joke in his presence. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his long fingers together, and looked at Harry with an expression that was either respect or alarm and possibly both. "Harry Potter. Do you understand what the founders of Hogwarts were?" "They built the school," Harry said. 1,000 years ago. 4 of them. 4 of the most powerful magical practitioners in recorded history, Ragnar corrected. Each the head of a noble magical house with bloodline stretching back to the earliest organized wizarding families in Britain. The blood of all 4 houses has narrowed, over the centuries, to tributaries too thin to carry formal claim. Generations of poor record-keeping, politics, and deliberate obscuring of lineages. He tapped the parchment. "Except, it appears, in yours." "How?" Harry asked. "Your mother," Ragnar said. "Lily Evans Potter. The Evans line appears unremarkable on the surface, Muggle-born, or so the official record states. However." He pulled a second document from the drawer, older, its edges soft with age. "Gringotts keeps records that the Ministry does not. The Evans family of Somerset, going back 11 generations, show a pattern of spontaneous magical manifestation too consistent and too specific in character to be random Muggle-born emergence. They were a squib branch of a much older family who obscured their lineage during the Muggle-burning period of the 16th century. The older family," he said, meeting Harry's eyes, "was of Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw descent." "And my dad?" Harry said. "The Potters descend from the Peverils, who descend from a lateral branch of the Gryffindor line. This has been suspected by genealogists for 2 centuries. The Slytherin connection is through your father's maternal grandmother, a Gaunt, technically, though she was disowned and her children raised under a different name. The Gaunts are the last acknowledged Slytherin line. The connection is there, buried, but blood remembers what records forget." He gestured at the bowl. "As you see." Harry sat with all of this for a moment. Outside the room, through the stone walls, he could hear the normal bustle of the bank, coins, movement, murmured transactions. Normal things happening in a normal world that had nothing to do with the fact that his blood had just turned a stone bowl gold. "What does true custodian mean?" he asked. Ragnar's expression became careful in a different way. "Beneath this bank," he said, "in the deepest vault, deeper than any client vault, deeper than our own treasury, there is a stone. The anchor stone. It was placed there by the founders themselves when they chartered the first Gringotts agreement, as a neutral holding site for the magical sovereignty of Hogwarts Castle. The castle, you understand, is not merely a building. It is a sentient magical construct of extraordinary complexity. It has a will, a memory, and something that functions remarkably like loyalty." A pause. "The anchor stone is how the castle's true ownership is tracked. It has not reacted to anyone in 400 years. He stood and moved to the door, opening it. "Come," he said. "I want you to see something." They went down. The Gringotts minecarts were fast enough that Harry's eyes watered in the rush of dark air, the torches on the walls blurring into streaks of fire. Mrs. Fig gripped the side of the cart with both hands and her eyes were pressed shut. Ragnar sat with the composure of a man who had made this journey 10,000 times and found it entirely unremarkable. Harry leaned into the wind and felt his hair drag back and thought, privately, that this was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he was aware enough of his own experience to recognize that this was a low bar and also to not care about that fact at all. They went deeper than the regular vault levels, past the great iron doors and the guard dragons and the increasingly cold stone corridors, down and down into a darkness that felt geological, ancient, pre-human. The air here tasted different. Mineral and still and something else, something that had no name in the vocabulary of an 8-year-old boy, though he would later describe it as intent. The air tasted like intent. The cart stopped. A corridor. Then a door, not iron, not stone, but something that looked like solidified shadow, cool and faintly luminescent, marked with symbols in the same old script from the parchment. Ragnar pressed his hand to the center of it and it opened without sound. Inside was a single room, bare stone, and in the middle of the floor, a plinth of dark rock, and on the plinth a stone that was roughly the size of Harry's fist, grey and unremarkable and ordinary-looking, which was somehow the least convincing ordinary-looking thing Harry had ever seen. "Go on," Ragnar said, from the doorway. Harry walked in. He could feel the stone before he reached it, not warmth exactly, more like the sensation of someone turning toward you in a dark room. An attention. He reached out and put his hand flat against it and the room went white. Not the blinding white of too much light. The warm white of pure sound, if sound had color. Something that was the color of an orchestra playing a note so low it lives in your chest rather than your ears. Harry felt it through his palm, up his arm, into his sternum, and then it was everywhere at once, a recognition so complete and so immediate that it wasn't like being seen, it was like being remembered. Like something ancient and sleeping had felt the exact right pressure on exactly the right nerve and said, "Oh, there you are, we've been waiting, we were starting to think you weren't coming." He became aware of a voice. Not audible, nothing so simple. More the impression of one, the structure of communication without the sound. Old. Female in some moods, male in others, vast in all of them. He would think later that it was less like a person and more like a place trying to learn how to speak. Heir, it said, in the wordless way. Owner. Child of 4. Yes, Harry thought back, because it seemed rude not to respond. Long time, the voice said. Something like grief in it, or the geological equivalent. The weight of centuries of unrecognized waiting. I'm sorry, Harry thought. I didn't know. A pulse of warmth, forgiving and absolute. Come soon. Come home. Then the white faded and Harry was standing in the vault room with his hand on a plain grey stone that was now, very definitely, glowing. Softly. Steadily. Like something that had been lit from the inside. He turned around. Ragnar was in the doorway and his expression was one that Harry would not understand until he was older, the expression of a being who has lived long enough to have seen nearly everything, and is now seeing the one thing he hadn't. Something between reverence and the deeply private satisfaction of being present for a moment that will be talked about long after you're gone. It hasn't glowed in 412 years, Ragnarok said. It talked to me, Harry said. Sort of. It will talk to you more clearly with time. Ragnarok paused. The castle is reaching out. You will feel it more strongly as you get older, and more strongly still when you are within its walls. Hogwarts, Harry said. Not a question. Yours, Ragnarok said. In every meaningful legal and magical sense, that castle is yours. Has been, since the moment your blood completed the Heir convergence. Dumbledore administers it. The Board of Governors believes they govern it. The Ministry thinks they have oversight. He let that sit for a moment, precise and deliberate. They do not own it. You do. Harry took his hand off the stone, it continued to glow softly, a warm ambient light in the cold vault, and turned to face Ragnarok fully. He was 8 years old, small for his age, in clothes 3 sizes too large and shoes with a small hole in the left toe. He had a scar on his forehead and glasses held together with sellotape at one corner and the particular straightness of spine that belongs to children who have learned to take up as little space as possible. But his eyes were very steady and very green and completely, absolutely unafraid. What do I do? He said. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. First, he said, we deal with your living situation. Then your finances. Then your education. A pause. You have time. You are 8. The school will not want you until you are 11. In the meantime, he said, and the satisfaction in his voice was deep and old and very goblin-specific, the satisfaction of a being whose entire civilization was built on the proper management of accounts suddenly confronted with the most interesting account they had ever held. In the meantime, we have a great deal of work to do. The work, that first day, was legal. Ragnarok summoned 2 other goblins, Griphook, young and sharp-faced, who took notes with the speed of someone who took pride in missing nothing, and an older one called Bledrig who dealt, apparently, specifically in inherited properties and ancient title law. They spread documents across the desk in Ragnarok's office and explained things to Harry in the direct, non-condescending manner of beings who did not see the point in softening information just because the recipient was young. The Potter vaults, 3 of them, the smallest of which contained more gold than Harry could meaningfully picture, the middle of which contained heirlooms and properties and a set of documents that included the deed to a house called Potter's Keep in Worcestershire that had been sitting empty for 7 years, and the largest of which was locked under a secondary inheritance seal that wouldn't open until Harry was either 17 or formally emancipated, whichever came first. The Peveril Vault, much older, smaller, but containing objects of significant magical importance including what Bledrig described as the true cloak of invisibility, which was not a description Harry understood the weight of yet but which made Ragnarok's expression very interesting. The Founder Vaults, 4 of them, 1 per house, each sealed, each awaiting the proper heir, each apparently containing, Bledrig said this the way a man says something he has been wanting to say for a very long time, substantially more than anyone currently imagines. And then the castle itself, Hogwarts, legally chartered under the Founders' Agreement of 980 AD, held in magical trust, its true ownership contingent on heir recognition, which had now occurred, which means, Harry said, because he'd been following this closely and had been waiting for the logical conclusion, that Dumbledore doesn't actually have the right to run it. Ragnarok's dark eyes met his. Technically, the goblin said, the Hogwarts Charter gives the true custodian final authority over all matters pertaining to the castle and its function as an educational institution. This has never been invoked because there has never been a recognized true custodian in living memory. The current headmaster operates under Board of Governors oversight, which itself operates under a ministry charter. These are all, from a strict legal standpoint, stopgap arrangements implemented in the absence of the rightful authority. He paused. Which is you? Can we prove all of this? Harry asked. We can prove all of this, Ragnarok said. Will Dumbledore fight it? Almost certainly. Good, Harry said, and meant it not aggressively but practically, the way you'd mean good about a puzzle being difficult. He looked at the document spread across the desk. What else do I need to know? He was still there 4 hours later, asking questions. Mrs. Fig had drunk 3 cups of tea and gone very quiet in the corner in the way of a person processing something that was going to take considerably longer than a Tuesday afternoon to properly absorb. Ragnarok had sent for food, real food, roast chicken and bread and something sweet that Harry ate without looking at it because he was reading a document about property law in Wizarding Britain and didn't want to lose his place. At 6 in the evening, Ragnarok sat back and looked at him across the desk. You are not what I expected, the goblin said. What did you expect? A child. He said it the way it was meant, not dismissively but as a specific assessment. You are clearly that. But you are also, he seemed to search for the right word. Interested. Most people who sit in that chair are frightened or greedy or both. You are neither. I'm a bit frightened, Harry said honestly. You don't look it. I know. He thought about the cupboard, about the atlas, about the 3 sizes too large clothes and the sandwich that was the nicest thing anyone had done for him in recent memory. I've had a lot of practice at not looking it. Ragnarok studied him. You have been mistreated, he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't pity. Goblins don't do pity in the human way. It was an accounting, a ledger entry being corrected. It wasn't, I mean, they fed me, Harry said, which was the explanation he'd given himself every time the word mistreated threatened to apply. Feeding is not the whole of it, Ragnarok said. The cupboard under the stairs. Yes? Harry looked at him. How do you know about that? The castle told us, Ragnarok said simply. Hogwarts monitors her heir, in a general sense. The anchor stone has been registering your location, your general state of well-being, since you were born. We knew where you were. We knew the conditions were, a pause, deliberate, insufficient. Our correspondence requesting an earlier appointment was, as Mrs. Fig has indicated, suppressed. His jaw tightened slightly. That will be addressed. Dumbledore put me there, Harry said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud and it felt strange in his mouth, like a word in a language he'd been learning privately without knowing why. Yes. Why? Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. I believe, he said carefully, that he wanted you manageable. Small. Grateful for the attention of the first person who was genuinely kind to you. Unaware of your position or your power. He looked at Harry. I do not think he is evil. I think he is a man who has decided he knows best, for everyone, and has been making arrangements accordingly for a very long time. And you're telling me this because? Because, Ragnarok said, and there was something in his tone that was the closest thing to fierce that Harry had seen from him, you are a client of Gringotts. And Gringotts' obligation is to you. Not to Albus Dumbledore. Not to the Ministry. Not to anyone who has been helping themselves to your inheritance and your life without your knowledge or consent. He held Harry's gaze. And because you asked. I have found, in a very long career, that it is usually the right people who ask. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he looked down at the glowing account summary on the parchment in front of him, the gold numbers, the long list of properties, the founder inheritance codes, the blinking red notation at the bottom that said true custodian status, active, dormant until age 11, and he made a decision that wasn't dramatic, that didn't come with trumpets or a feeling of destiny, but that settled into him with the quiet certainty of something that had been true for a long time and was finally being acknowledged. He was going to stop being small. Not because of the gold, though gold helped. Not because of the titles, though titles had uses. Not because the castle wanted him, though that mattered in a way that went deeper than he had words for yet. He was going to stop being small because he was, apparently, not small, and had never been, and someone had gone to considerable trouble to make him believe otherwise, and he found he was more interested in being honest than in being convenient. "What happens next?" he asked. Ragnarok reached into a drawer and produced a small leather-bound book, which he slid across the desk. "You read," he said. "Everything I can give you: inheritance law, founder history, castle protocols, the political structure of the Wisengamot. You have 3 years. Use them." He closed his own ledger with a sound like a door clicking shut. "I will handle the legal machinery. I will arrange for funds to be accessible without ministry knowledge. I will begin the formal challenge process." A pause. "And I will send correspondence regarding your living arrangements to parties who cannot ignore it." "What parties?" "Parties who are aware that the true custodian of Hogwarts living in a cupboard under the stairs would be," Ragnarok said, in the precise tone of a goblin who has chosen his words like weapons, "an institutional embarrassment of historic proportions." Harry almost smiled. "You're threatening them." "I am apprising them of the situation," Ragnarok said, with enormous dignity. Harry did smile, then, a small quick thing that changed his face considerably. It was the smile of someone who has just realized that having allies, real ones, is a different kind of warmth than any he has known. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Ragnarok said. "Pay your account management fees. That will be thanks enough." They were back on the surface, back through the vault cart, back up through the cold stone corridors, back into the marble hall where the evening light was coming gold through the high windows, before Harry thought of something and stopped. "Ragnarok." The goblin turned. "The other heirs," Harry said. "Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin. All the other people with partial claims who got pushed aside when the line split. Are there any of them still?" "There are people with partial descents," Ragnarok said. "Distant cousins of the founder lines. None of them hold anything close to your concentration of bloodline. None of them carry the Anchor Stone's recognition." He paused. "You are it." "But they have some claim," Harry said. "Historically." "Historically. Yes. Very diluted." Harry nodded slowly. "I don't want enemies," he said. I think I'd rather find out who those people are and whether they might want to be something else." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. "Allies," he said. "Yes. That," the goblin said, and this time there was no mistaking the expression, it was approval, precise and genuine and not given lightly, "is a very good instinct." He held the door to the outside open. The evening air of Diagon Alley came in, warm and complex and alive. "We will add it to the agenda." Mrs. Figg was at Harry's elbow as they stepped out into the alley, still clutching her handbag, still wearing the expression of a woman who had been carrying a secret for 7 years and had finally set it down and wasn't entirely sure what to do with her hands. "Are you all right?" she asked him. Harry thought about the cupboard. He thought about the glow of the stone in the dark vault and the voice that had said, "There you are, we've been waiting." He thought about the leather book under his arm, full of things he didn't know yet but would. He thought about the boy in the novel about the prince, and the way reading it had hurt, and understood now what the hurt had been. He had known, in the part of himself that kept things anyway. He had known all along that the story was his, and he hadn't been ready, and now he was. "Yes," he said, and walked out into the warm gold light of a summer evening that was, by every possible measure, the first evening of his real life. Behind them, through the stone and the dark and the deep cold corridors of the bank, in the silent vault at the bottom of the world, the Anchor Stone glowed on, steady and unwavering, like something that had been waiting 400 years to be remembered and had decided, now that the wait was over, that it was never going to stop. Chapter 2, Lord of Four Houses. The letter arrived at number 4 Privet Drive 3 days after the Gringotts visit, and it did not come by owl. It came by goblin. 2 of them, in fact, wearing dark coats and carrying a document case of black leather stamped with the Gringotts seal in gold. They arrived at precisely 9 in the morning, knocked on the front door with the particular authority of beings who knock as a courtesy rather than a request, and when Vernon Dursley opened the door in his dressing gown with a piece of toast halfway to his mouth, the senior goblin, Bledrig, Harry recognized him, produced a document and held it up. "Mr. Vernon Dursley," Bledrig said, in the tone of a man reading from scripture. "You are currently serving as non-legal guardian to one Harrison James Potter, a recognized minor of significant wizarding estate. You have, over the course of 7 years, failed to provide adequate living conditions, appropriate nutrition, educational resources, or emotional care as required under the Magical Minors Welfare Act of 1863, the terms of which apply to all guardians of wizarding children regardless of their own magical status." He turned the page. "You have intercepted and destroyed or suppressed 14 pieces of official correspondence directed to your ward. You have assigned said ward to sleeping quarters with a floor space of 22 square feet, classified under wizarding welfare law as inadequate habitation. You have, now see here," Vernon started. "I am not finished," Bledrig said, without raising his voice. He didn't need to. "You have failed to disclose to your ward his legal name, his inheritance, his status, or the existence of a standing bank account in his name accumulating both funds and magical interest since his first birthday. Under the Gringotts Client Protection Charter, signed by the British Ministry of Magic in 1752 and never revoked, all of these actions constitute interference with a bank client's account access, which is," he turned another page, "a criminal offence under both Goblin banking law and the Magical Minors Act, carrying penalties including financial restitution, a formal ministry caution, and in aggravated cases, asset seizure." The toast fell off Vernon Dursley's fork. "We are not, at this time, pursuing the criminal route," Bledrig said pleasantly. "We are, instead, making arrangements." He produced a second document. "Harrison Potter will be provided with the second bedroom of this property, the one currently occupied by decorative storage and Dudley Dursley's broken toys, effective immediately. He will receive adequate food, clothing purchased to his actual size, access to educational materials, and will not be assigned household labor beyond what is appropriate for a child of his age. In return, Gringotts will not file a formal complaint with the Ministry, the Wiesengemot, or the rather alarming number of newspaper contacts our Client Relations Department maintains." A pause. "Do you have questions?" Petunia Dursley appeared behind her husband's shoulder, very pale. "You can't," she started. "We can," Bledrig said. "We have. Good morning." He handed the document to Vernon, who took it with the reflexive compliance of a man who has just understood that the thing he is dealing with has considerably larger teeth than he'd assumed, and the two goblins turned and walked back down the garden path as if they did this sort of thing every Tuesday, which, Harry suspected, they probably did. Harry was at the top of the stairs, watching through the banister. He caught Bledrig's eye just before the goblin went through the gate, and the goblin gave him a single nod, precise, businesslike, entirely satisfying, and was gone. Vernon turned and looked up at Harry with the expression of a man reassessing his situation. Harry looked back. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there on the stairs in his too large clothes and his taped-together glasses and held Vernon Dursley's gaze with the patience of someone who has a great deal of time and very few things to lose. Vernon went inside and closed the door. Harry went to bed that night in the second bedroom, which was full of broken toys. He moved efficiently into the hallway, and which had a window that looked out over the back garden, and which was, by a considerable margin, the best room he had ever slept in. He opened the leather book Ragnarok had given him and started at the beginning. He read everything. In the 3 years between Gringotts and Hogwarts, Harry Potter read with the focused intensity of someone who has just discovered that the world is much larger than the size of a cupboard and intends to understand all of it. The books came through Ragnarok, delivered by Owl, parceled in brown paper, arriving weekly with a regularity that became one of the fixed pleasures of Harry's existence. History of Magic, the real kind, not the sanitized textbook version. Wizarding Law, Goblin annotated, with corrections in the margins where the official version conflicted with historical fact. Magical Theory, not the how-to-spell-casting sort but the deep structural sort, the kind that explained why magic behaved as it did, what the underlying logic was, where the rules came from. He read about the founders. Godric Gryffindor, who was less the noble hero figure of popular legend and more a ruthlessly pragmatic military strategist who happened to also have genuine warmth, the combination, Harry thought, was probably what made him legendary rather than merely effective. Helga Hufflepuff, whose reputation as the soft one of the four was the most persistent and the most wrong, she was the political genius of the group, the one who had built the alliances, negotiated the protections, ensured the school's survival through 3 different attempts to destroy it in its first century. Rowena Ravenclaw, whose published works, even the ones everyone knew, were only a fraction of what she'd actually written, the rest sealed in the Ravenclaw vault and apparently containing theoretical frameworks that would, Ragnarok's marginal notes suggested, constitute a revolution in magical understanding if anyone with the access was smart enough to read them. And Salazar Slytherin, who was not the one-dimensional monster of Hogwarts, a history and whose actual documented opinions on blood status were considerably more nuanced and considerably more interesting than mudbloods shouldn't be here. He read about Parseltongue, which he had apparently been speaking to the garden snake behind number 4 for the past 3 years without knowing it was unusual. He read about the Deathly Hallows, and the Peveril line, and put that information in a separate internal folder marked very complicated, return to later. He read about the political structure of Wizarding Britain, the Wisengamot, the Ministry, the ancient noble houses and their voting rights and the way the balance of power had been slowly shifting since Voldemort's first rise. He read about the Dark Lord with the same focused attention he gave to everything, not with the horror the adults in his life seemed to expect but with the analytical interest of someone trying to understand a phenomenon, which, it turned out, was a far more useful approach. He did his homework. Not Hogwarts homework, he wasn't there yet, but the homework Ragnarok set him, which was considerably more demanding. Monthly letters, sometimes 2 a week, detailing what he had learned and more importantly what he had questioned. The goblins' responses were not kind, exactly. They were honest, which Harry had discovered was better. When his analysis was good, Ragnarok said so in precisely 3 words. When it was poor, he explained why in considerably more. He learned to manage the financial statements, because Ragnarok said he should understand his own accounts and Harry agreed with this completely. The Potter vaults were vast in the comfortable, old money way. The Founder vaults were theoretical until he came of age, they sat in the accounts as pending inheritance, enormous numbers behind locked doors, but the Potter funds were active and accessible, and Ragnarok had arranged a Gringotts discretionary card linked to a sub-account that Harry could use without ministry oversight. He used it for books. Occasionally for food, when the Dursleys were being particularly minimalist. Once for a very good pair of shoes that fit his actual feet, which he wore until they wore out and then bought another pair of, because he was allowed to. The Hogwarts connection grew louder as he got older. It started as dreams, not vivid narrative dreams but sensory impressions, like receiving a signal from a radio station that wasn't quite in range. Warmth through stone. The smell of old wood and candle smoke. The feeling of rooms, corridor shapes and archway heights, a geography that lodged in him with the certainty of somewhere he'd been before and couldn't quite remember. Sometimes he'd wake up with specific images, a classroom with tall windows looking over a lake, a corridor with a portrait that kept changing its mind about what it wanted to look like, a room deep in a tower that was completely empty and smelled of something floral and faintly electrical, and which wanted, very much, for him to visit. He started sketching the layouts from his dreams in a notebook. By age 10 he had 14 pages of corridors and rooms, cross-referenced with what Hogwarts, a history confirmed and what it didn't. There were a significant number of discrepancies. The official history, he was fairly certain, knew about 40% of the actual castle. The 60% nobody knew about was, he suspected, the more interesting part. He met Hermione Granger in Flourish and Blots on a Saturday in August, 2 months before they were both due at Hogwarts. He was in the back of the shop in the restricted section, not the Hogwarts designated restricted section but the academic one, the dry reference texts that cost more than most people wanted to spend and attracted a specific sort of customer, looking for a particular Goblin-era legal text that Ragnarok had mentioned in his last letter. The shop was busy in the particular way of late August in Diagon Alley, parents and children buying school supplies, everyone slightly harassed, the atmosphere of people doing necessary things on a schedule rather than choosing to be there. He heard her before he saw her. "That's not accurate," she said, to no one in particular, or rather to the book she was holding, which was Hogwarts, a history, which Harry knew well. The North Tower wasn't added in the 12th century, it was part of the original structure. "The records at the Bodleian, it's a common misconception," Harry said, because she was standing 3 feet away and he'd heard himself speaking before he'd decided to. She turned. Brown eyes behind large glasses, dark hair everywhere, wearing new robes that were slightly too long at the wrist in the way of robes bought with growing room. Her chin came up immediately at the interruption. "The Bodleian has the original surveyor's notes from 1012. The dating error in Hogwarts, a history, is in the 3rd chapter. They confused renovation records with construction records." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I read the surveyor's notes," Harry said. A brief silence. "They're not in print. Gringotts has copies. Most original magical construction was chartered through them." He held out his hand. "Can I see?" She handed him the book, still watching him with the expression of someone recalibrating. He opened to chapter 3, found the relevant passage, showed her. "See, here, they cite the Hogwarts restoration project of 1143 as the construction date, but if you cross-reference with the founder's original charter of 980, she said, before he could finish. "Yes, I have that. But the charter doesn't specify individual tower construction." She took the book back. "Who are you?" "Harry Potter." Something crossed her face, not the wide-eyed the Harry Potter response he'd gotten from the few wizarding people he'd interacted with, but a more measured, rapidly processing look. "Hermione Granger," she said. "First year?" he asked. "Yes." "You?" "Yes." "Have you read the whole history section?" She gestured at the shelves around them with the proprietary air of someone who had already assessed the entire shop and found it mostly adequate. "Most of it. There are significant gaps in the official record between 900 and 1200, they rely heavily on secondary sources and at least 3 of the primary sources they cite have known transcription errors." Hermione blinked. "I know about the transcription errors," she said, in the tone of someone delighted to have found something in common, "but my parents said if I bought any more books on primary source methodology I wasn't allowed to bring them to the dinner table." "Are your parents?" "Dentists. They're brilliant, but they have a thing about dinner table topic boundaries." She looked at him for a moment. "You've read the surveyor's notes for a school you've never attended." "I've been interested in the castle for a while," Harry said. "Why?" He thought about the glowing stone in the dark vault. About the voice that had said "there you are." About 14 pages of corridor sketches in a notebook at home. "It's an interesting place," he said, which was accurate as far as it went. Hermione appeared to find this answer insufficient but filed it for later. He could tell by the way her expression shifted, tucking the question away with the efficiency of someone who has a mental categorization system and trusts it. "I've made a study list," she said, and produced a folded piece of parchment from her pocket, which turned out to be considerably more complex than the phrase study list would suggest. It was a color-coded priority system cross-referenced by subject area, with a supplementary list of books to acquire and a timeline based on Hogwarts' curriculum schedule. It was, Harry thought, the most methodical thing he'd ever seen a person produce without institutional support. "This is very good," he said honestly. "You've missed magical theory, though. Not the curriculum theory, the foundational sort." She frowned. "The Hogwarts curriculum doesn't include foundational theory until 3rd year." "I know. That's why it's a gap." She looked at him sharply, evaluating, genuinely uncertain whether to be impressed or annoyed. He could see her working it out. "What texts?" she said. He recommended 4. She produced a quill and added them to the list, correctly identifying where they fit in the priority order with only minimal prompting. They were there for another 40 minutes, during which they discovered that Hermione had read more broadly, Harry had read more deeply, and the intersection was both contentious and energizing in the way that good arguments between people of equal intelligence always are. "You don't know as much as you think you do," Hermione said, when he made a confident claim about the logical derivation of the switching spell that she disagreed with. "I know," Harry said. "Show me where I'm wrong." She blinked. She hadn't expected that response. "Most people argue," she said. "Arguing when you might be mistaken is a waste of time," Harry said. "Where am I wrong?" She showed him. She was right, not entirely, his core point was sound, but the specific example he'd used was flawed, and she demonstrated this with a precision that was genuinely satisfying to be on the receiving end of. "You're right," he said. Another blink. "You're unusual," she said. "Probably," he agreed. Her mother found her 20 minutes later, and spent a moment looking between Harry and the stack of books they generated together and Hermione's extended annotated study list with the expression of a woman who had not expected her daughter's book shopping to become collaborative. "Mum, this is Harry," Hermione said. "He's going to Hogwarts too. He thinks there are significant gaps in the official historical record between 900 and 1200. She said this the way you'd introduce someone's most interesting characteristic. He's read the original surveyor's notes." "Has he?" said Mrs. Granger, in the tone of a woman recalibrating her expectations for the afternoon. She looked at Harry. "Will you be on the Hogwarts Express?" "Yes," Harry said. "Hermione will find you," Mrs. Granger said, with the certainty of someone describing a natural law. "She always finds the interesting ones." Neville Longbottom came into Harry's life slightly earlier, in July, through a Ragnarok-facilitated meeting that turned out to be one of those things that seem minor at the time and reveal their importance only in retrospect. Ragnarok had mentioned, in one of his letters, that there was another child with a partial founder descent worth knowing about. Not heir level, nothing close, but the Longbottom family traced a documented lateral branch of the Hufflepuff line through the 17th century, diluted to near nothing in terms of magical inheritance, but real. More relevantly, Neville Longbottom was in a situation that had some structural similarities to Harry's, in the sense of a guardian making decisions about his life based on what they thought was good for him rather than what actually was. Augusta Longbottom was not cruel. She was decisive, opinionated, and entirely convinced that she knew what her grandson needed better than her grandson did, which was a different problem but still a problem. She was also a woman of impeccable pure-blood credentials who had just received a very politely worded letter from Gringotts noting that she had an appointment with a representative of the Potter estate and didn't want to refuse it because refusing Gringotts was not something Augusta Longbottom did. They met at the Leaky Cauldron, which was neutral territory, Harry and Ragnarok on one side, Augusta and Neville on the other. Augusta was sharp-faced and sharp-eyed in the way of small fierce birds, and she watched Harry with an assessment that was the polite pure-blood version of very pointed scrutiny. Neville sat beside her and was, at first glance, the sort of child who had been told he was less than he was for long enough to have started to believe it. He was round-faced and earnest, and he knocked over his pumpkin juice within the first 2 minutes and spent the next 30 seconds apologizing for it in a way that suggested he'd had a great deal of practice at apologizing for himself. "You don't need to do that," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Sorry?" "Apologize for spilling something. It happens. Have some of mine." He pushed his glass across the table. "I'm Harry." "I know," Neville said. Gran told me who you are." "Did she tell you who you are?" Neville blinked. Across the table, Augusta went very still in a way that suggested she was listening closely and choosing to let this play out. "I'm Neville Longbottom," Neville said, somewhat uncertain about where this was going. The Longbottom family traces a documented branch of the Hufflepuff line, Harry said. Diluted, but real. Your grandmother is one of the most decorated Aurors of the last century. Your parents are, he paused, because this was terrain he was less certain about, but Ragnarok had told him the basic facts and he thought Neville probably needed someone to say it plainly rather than around the edges. Your parents were tortured into incapacitation by Death Eaters. Which means you have been raised by a woman who loves you and is also terrified of losing you, which is why she's been trying to make you into something that can survive, and which has been, I imagine, a bit like trying to fit into a suit of armor that's the wrong size. The silence at the table was very complete. Neville was staring at him. Augusta's face had done something complicated. That was rude, Neville said, but there was something behind the reflex, not anger, something more fragile and more real. Probably, Harry said. Was it wrong? A very long pause. No, Neville said, quietly. I'm not trying to be rude, Harry said. I'm saying it because I've spent the last 3 years being told I was less than I was, and nobody who could have said it plainly to me did, and it would have helped if they had. He looked at Neville directly. You're not less than. You're just in the wrong size armor. Neville looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who has just had a window opened in a room they'd assumed was sealed. Augusta cleared her throat. I am sitting right here, she said. I know, Harry said pleasantly. I think you're exceptional. I also think you've been so frightened of losing him that you've been protecting him from the things that would make him unlosable. Augusta Longbottom looked at him across the table for a long, measuring moment. She was a woman who had survived the war, buried her son's mind without burying his body, and raised a grandson alone, and she was not the sort of person who accepted criticism from an 11-year-old without response. You are remarkably direct for someone your age, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. She looked at Neville, who was still sitting very still in the way of someone receiving unexpected information and not sure whether to cry or laugh or argue. She looked back at Harry. What are you proposing, Lord Potter? Friends, Harry said simply. He needs them. So do I, honestly. And he's going to be very good at things no one's let him be good at yet. He glanced at Ragnarok, who was sitting with the studied neutrality of a goblin who had arranged this meeting and was pleased with how it was going. Ragnarok can confirm the Hufflepuff connection, if that matters to you. It matters rather less than you seem to think, Augusta said. What matters is that you are proposing a friendship with my grandson on the basis of, she paused, what, exactly? On the basis that I think he's interesting and capable and being undersold, Harry said. And that I could do with someone honest around me before Hogwarts turns into politics. Neville said, very quietly, I don't have many friends. Neither do I, Harry said. One, as of last month. She argues a lot. Despite himself, Neville's mouth curved. My gran argues a lot. Then you're already trained for it. By the 1st of September, Harry had read 43 of the books Ragnarok had sent, compiled his own annotated index of Hogwarts known and suspected architecture, developed a working understanding of wizarding constitutional law that was better than most practicing solicitors, and made exactly 2 friends who both knew a meaningful version of who he was. Hermione knew he was the boy who lived and that he was unusual and that he'd read things she hadn't, and she found all of this much less interesting than the fact that he was willing to argue with her properly rather than just deferring, which she'd apparently never had. Neville knew that Harry thought he was better than he'd been told, and was clinging to this information with the careful desperation of someone who has found something valuable and doesn't quite trust that it's going to stay. Neither of them knew about the Gringotts vault. About the founder inheritance. About the anchor stone and the voice in the dark and the castle that was, with increasing clarity and increasing warmth, reaching toward him through whatever medium it reached through, dreams, sensations, the occasional inexplicable certainty that something in a particular direction wanted his attention. He'd tell them. He had decided that. He would tell them on the train, because they deserved to know who they'd attached themselves to, and because going into Hogwarts with secrets from the people he trusted was not how he wanted to start. The castle was louder this morning. He'd woken up at 5 with the overwhelming impression of light through tall windows and the smell of something old and warm and real, and he'd lain in the dark in his proper bedroom with its proper-sized bed and thought, "I'm coming," directed at nothing in particular or everything at once, and the warmth had sharpened in response, immediate and glad. He'd packed his trunk himself, efficiently, practically, with a specific selection of books that wasn't the mandatory school list and was considerably more interesting. He'd added the notebook with the corridor sketches. He'd added a small leather folio with the key documents from Ragnarok, the inheritance parchment, the anchor stone certification, 3 letters that were pre-written and needed only his signature to initiate actions he'd been planning since that first day in the vault. He checked his wand, 11 inches, holly and phoenix feather, from Ollivander, who had gone very quiet when the wand chose him and had said, "Curious, very curious," in a tone that Harry had filed away as probably significant, "investigate later." He ran a quick practice motion in his empty bedroom, feeling the easy responsiveness of it, the particular clarity of a well-matched wand, and the chair beside his desk slid 3 inches to the left, prompted, and returned to position. He went downstairs. The Dursleys were at breakfast. Vernon looked at him with the look he'd perfected over the past 2 years, not hostility exactly, but the determined neutrality of a man who had made a treaty with something he didn't understand and was committed to maintaining it. Petunia put a plate of toast in front of Harry without being asked, which was as close as she'd come to an apology. Harry ate the toast and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say. The taxi to King's Cross was awkward in the specific way of 2 parties who have an arrangement and nothing else. Vernon loaded the trunk without complaining. Dudley watched Harry from the doorway with an expression that was part its usual resentment and part something that had been there for the past 2 years, a confused, reluctant curiosity that had never quite found its voice. At King's Cross, at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, Harry stood for a moment with his trolley and his trunk and his owl, Hedwig, white and already imperious, acquired 3 months ago from Elops and already his closest companion in the Dursley household, and felt the familiar pull from the other side of the barrier, the thickened air, the copper and lightning smell that was the magical world's specific signature. The anchor stone's warmth was there too, a direction now rather than just a feeling. North and slightly west. The castle was a way away, but it was reaching, and the reaching had a quality of excitement in it, like something that had been waiting had checked the clock and was pleased with the time. Harry walked through the barrier. Platform 9 3/4 was steam and noise and families saying goodbye and first-years looking overwhelmed and older students greeting each other and the Hogwarts Express being enormous and red and entirely real. Harry stood in the middle of it and let it happen around him, and Hedwig ruffled her feathers in a satisfied sort of way on top of her cage, as if to say yes, this is more like it. He found Hermione by the simple method of following the sound of someone confidently explaining something to someone who hadn't asked. She was near the front of the train with her parents, who were taking photographs with a Muggle camera and wearing matching expressions of loving anxiety. She spotted Harry over her mother's shoulder and her face changed in the specific way it always did when she saw him, not soft exactly, more like something coming into focus. "Your trunk's too heavy," he said. "I know," she said. "I accounted for it. You can't levitate it yet. Someone will help." She said it with complete confidence, and she was right. A prefect appeared within 2 minutes and dealt with it, charmed by her precise and detailed thank you. She turned back to Harry. "You're late." "I'm exactly on time. I've been here 40 minutes. That's not me being late, that's you being early." She almost smiled. Her mother was watching this exchange with the cautiously delighted expression of a woman who had been quietly worried about her daughter's social development and was revising her estimates. "It's good to meet you properly, Harry," Mrs. Granger said. "Hermione hasn't stopped talking about the surveyor's notes." "Mum," Hermione said, with feeling. Neville found them 10 minutes later, round-faced and slightly anxious under his new robes, trailing behind his grandmother, who was wearing a formidable hat and surveying the platform with the air of someone checking for threats. She saw Harry and gave him a nod that was, by Augusta Longbottom standards, practically warm. "Don't lose him," she said to Harry. "I won't," Harry said. Neville looked briefly mortified and then, catching Harry's eye, settled into something more like acceptance. He fell into step beside Harry with the slightly tentative quality of someone trying out a role they haven't fully committed to yet. They found a compartment. Hermione produced a book immediately, then put it down, which meant she was choosing conversation over reading, which Harry had learned was significant. Neville pressed his face to the window as the train began to move and watched his grandmother until she was out of sight, and his expression during this was private and complicated, and Harry looked away from it to give him the space. "There's something I should tell you both," Harry said, when the platform had disappeared and they were moving through the grey outskirts of London, the city giving way to the gentler, greener sprawl of countryside. "Before we get to Hogwarts. Before everything starts." They both looked at him. Hedwig clicked her beak from her cage in the rack above. He told them everything. Not in a rush, not hedging, not managing their reactions, just straight through, from the Gringotts visit at 8 to the Anchor Stone to Ragnarok's letters to the corridor sketches to the legal documents in the folio in his trunk and what he planned to do with them, and what it all meant, and what Hogwarts actually was, legally and magically, and who it actually belonged to. Hermione interrupted 4 times, each time with a question that cut to exactly the right point. Neville didn't interrupt at all. He sat with his hands on his knees and listened with the focused attention of someone for whom loyalty, once given, is thorough. When Harry finished, the compartment was quiet for a moment. "Right," Hermione said. She was doing the processing face, the rapid internal categorization. "So the school we're going to actually belongs to you?" "Yes. And Dumbledore knows about the founder inheritance lines but presumably doesn't know you've been to Gringotts. He might suspect something. Ragnarok thinks there's a monitoring charm on the Potter accounts that someone placed through ministry channels. We've been working around it." "The corridor sketches," Neville said, unexpectedly. They both looked at him. He had the slightly surprised expression of someone who has said something before they'd checked whether they were going to. "Sorry. Can I see them?" "The sketches. My gran has a floor plan of Hogwarts from the 1800s. It doesn't match what's in the books and I always thought it was a mistake but maybe it wasn't." Harry looked at him. Then he got his notebook out and handed it across. Neville opened it carefully, smoothing the pages, and then his eyes went sharp and focused in a way that was completely unlike the apologetic, uncertain Neville of the table knock and the too long apology. "This corridor," he said, pointing. "Gran's more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 3, The Sorting That Wasn't. The Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station at 7:53 in the evening, and Harry felt the castle before he saw it. It hit him the moment the train crossed some invisible boundary in the landscape, a line in the earth, probably, the outermost edge of the school's protection wards, and the warmth that had been a direction for 3 years became a presence, immediate and enormous and deeply, privately glad. Like walking into a room where every light comes on at once. He sat up straighter without meaning to, and Hermione, who had been watching him the way she watched everything she found interesting, noticed immediately. "You feel it," she said. "Yes." "What's it like?" He thought about it. "Like being recognized," he said. Outside, the Hogwarts Express was slowing, the station lights appearing through the dark windows, and around them the compartment corridor was filling with the noise of students gathering trunks and owls and familiar arguments about lost things. Harry sat for another moment and let the feeling settle through him, vast and old and warm, the specific warmth of something that had been waiting for a long time and was now finished waiting, and then he stood up and put his jacket on and picked up Hedwig's cage. "Ready?" Neville asked. He had the corridor sketches notebook tucked into his robes because he'd been studying it for the last 2 hours and Harry had told him to keep it for now, which had made Neville go still for a moment in the way of someone receiving something they hadn't expected and weren't sure what to do with. "Been ready for 3 years," Harry said, and stepped out into the corridor. The boats across the lake were Hagrid's domain, as Harry knew from everything he'd read, and Hagrid was exactly as the historical accounts described, enormous and warm and loud in the way of people who have never needed to be quiet to be heard. He bellowed, "Fur's years! Fur's years this way," with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved this part, and Harry found himself immediately disposed to like him, which was a good instinct and would turn out to be a correct one. The boats moved across the black water with no visible means of propulsion, and the castle appeared around the bend of the lake, and Harry looked at it. He'd dreamed it. He'd sketched pieces of it from those dreams. He'd read descriptions of it in 14 different books and heard it in the not-quite-audible voice of whatever the Anchor Stone had put in him 3 years ago. None of that was the same as seeing it rise above the water in the October dark, lit from within, enormous and specific and real in a way that made the word home form in his mind without him choosing it. The castle's response was immediate and extraordinary. Several windows on the east face flared, not dangerously, just brighter, warm gold against the dark stone, a sudden illumination without explanation. 2 portraits on the main exterior facade, barely visible at this distance, turned in their frames. A door at the base of the east tower opened briefly and then closed. "Did the castle just..." Neville started. "Yes," Harry said. "Is it going to do that when you go inside?" "Probably something like that," Harry said, which was an understatement he was fairly comfortable with at this point. Hermione had her eyes on the castle with the particular attention she gave to things she was about to research comprehensively. "The east tower lit up," she said. "That's the Ravenclaw Tower in the official layout. But according to your sketches, it's not just a house tower," Harry said. "It's Ravenclaw's original study. The house comes from the tower, not the other way around." He watched the light settle back to normal as the boats approached the dock. "She used to work there when the school was young. The room I told you about, the one that keeps showing up in my dreams. It's up there." "What's in it?" Neville asked. "I don't know yet," Harry said. "But it wants me to visit." They docked. They climbed the stone steps through the side entrance, and Harry put his hand against the wall as he passed through the door, not a dramatic gesture, just a touch, like greeting, and felt the response run through the stone like a current, quick and warm and absolutely certain. Around them, the other first-years were craning their necks at the ceiling and the moving staircases and the portraits, and Harry walked through it all with his eyes calm and his pace steady, familiar with the unfamiliar in a way that no one around him could quite explain. Professor McGonagall was waiting for them in the entrance hall, angular and precise and sharp-eyed in a way Harry recognized from every account he'd read. She looked them over with the professional assessment of a woman who had seen 40 years of first-year classes and could identify the troublemakers, the nervous ones, and the genuinely unusual within approximately 30 seconds. Her eyes moved across the group and stopped, briefly but unmistakably, on Harry. Something happened in her expression. Very quick, very contained, a crack in the professional surface, something between recognition and disturbance, and then it was gone and she was explaining the sorting in the precise, measured tone of a woman who was very good at her job. Harry listened with genuine attention, because the sorting hat was, from an academic standpoint, one of the most remarkable objects in Wizarding Britain. A thinking artifact of Founder-era construction, containing in some functional sense the minds of all 4 founders, capable of independent magical assessment, there was nothing else like it in the world. He was curious about it in the way he was curious about the castle itself, the instinctive interest of someone for whom these things were not merely school tradition but personal history. He was also fairly certain it was about to have a problem. The Great Hall was everything the dreams had suggested and more. The ceiling showed the actual October sky, cloud-scattered and dark, with the enchantment producing the stars that were there even when they weren't visible. Harry knew this from Hermione, who had read it in Hogwarts, a history, and taken significant satisfaction in the fact that Hermione Granger had not yet failed to know something before he did. The 4 long tables were full of older students turning to watch the first years file in, and the high table was a row of faces Harry catalogued with the speed of someone who had been doing this for 3 years. Dumbledore, center. Blue eyes and silver hair and the particular expression of a man who projects benevolence so thoroughly that it has become a kind of weather around him. Harry met his eyes across the hall. This happened, unavoidably, because Dumbledore was already looking, which was interesting, and kept his expression neutral. Dumbledore's gaze was warm and searching and faintly, delicately probing in a way that Harry recognized from his reading on legilimency, and he let it find nothing because there was nothing to find unless he offered it, which he didn't. Dumbledore blinked. Almost imperceptibly, but Harry caught it. Good evening, Harry thought, not projected, just private. Not yet. Quirinus Quirrell was at the end of the table, which was also interesting, but that was a problem he had a plan for and it could wait. The Sorting Hat came out on its stool and delivered its song, which was clever and rhymed well and communicated exactly the right amount about the houses without saying anything genuinely useful, which Harry suspected was deliberate. The hat had been doing this for 1,000 years and knew what it was doing. McGonagall produced a scroll and began calling names. First years went up one by one, Hannah Abbott, then a few others Harry hadn't learned yet, and the hat made its assessments with the efficiency of long practice. Some were quick. Some made it think. Harry watched the process with genuine interest, noting the ones who went quickly versus the ones who took time, trying to read what that might mean about the assessment criteria. Susan Bones, Hufflepuff, quickly. Terry Boot, Ravenclaw. Lavender Brown, Gryffindor, very fast. The castle, Harry noticed, was doing something. Subtle, barely anything, but he could feel it in the floor and the walls, the low-frequency vibration of a vast thing paying attention. It was not alarmed. It was alert, in the way a dog is alert when its owner is about to come through the door. Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked to the stool with her chin high and her hands clasped firmly behind her back in the particular posture of someone suppressing nerves through structural discipline. The hat settled on her head and was quiet for almost 30 seconds, longer than most, and then, loudly, Gryffindor. She sat down at the Gryffindor table with a visible exhale of relief. Harry caught her eye and she lifted her chin, I knew it, which was not entirely accurate but entirely Hermione, and he smiled. More names. Longbottom, Neville. Neville went to the stool with the careful tread of someone who has been told throughout his life to be afraid of failing and has therefore become afraid of nearly everything. He sat down. The hat dropped over his eyes. It took 2 minutes. Harry watched the hat during those 2 minutes with the focused attention of someone listening to a conversation they can't quite hear. Something about the deliberation felt significant, not uncertain, exactly, but argued. Like the hat was contending with something. Gryffindor. Neville came back to the growing Gryffindor group with the slightly dazed expression of someone who'd been told something privately that was different from what they'd expected, and Harry filed that away too. More names. The hall whittled down. Malfoy, Draco. Harry looked at Draco Malfoy with genuine interest for the first time. He'd met him briefly in Madame Malkin's robe shop 2 months ago. Malfoy had been polished and assured in the way of children raised to believe the world's natural orientation was toward them, had offered some commentary on Muggleborns that was more reflexive than considered, and had then said something that surprised Harry, had asked, with what seemed like genuine curiosity beneath the performance, "What do you think of all this? Hogwarts, the houses, the whole thing?" Harry had said, "I think it's more complicated than people pretend." And Malfoy had looked at him for a moment with something underneath the confidence, something thoughtful, and then the moment had passed. The hat touched Malfoy's head and said Slytherin before it had fully settled. Not a surprise. But Harry noticed that the hat lingered a second longer than the immediacy suggested, as if it had started to say something else and changed its mind. Potter, Harry. The hall changed in one breath. The murmur that went through it was complex: recognition, excitement, the specific social electricity of a name that meant something. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and picked the hat up and put it on his own head, which was not the protocol. You were supposed to wait for McGonagall to place it, but the hat was a founder artifact and it seemed appropriate to handle it personally. He heard McGonagall make a small sound. The hat settled over his eyes. The hall went dark. And then, inside the dark, a voice, old and dry and genuinely interested, "Well," the hat said. "This is the most interesting head I've sat on in 4 centuries. Is it?" Harry thought back, conversationally. "You are aware," the hat said, "that you carry all 4 bloodlines." "Yes. And that you are, technically speaking, the person I was made to serve. All of us were made to serve. The founders built me to sort in their absence. You are, in magical and legal terms, not an absence any longer." A pause. "I've been waiting for you. I didn't know I was, until now. Where do I belong?" Harry asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. "Everywhere," the hat said. "Which makes the question interesting. Each house is a quarter of your inheritance. You are not better matched to one than the others, you carry them all with equal conviction, which is frankly unprecedented and also deeply inconvenient from a procedural standpoint. A beat. I cannot sort you. Sorting you into any single house would be like dividing a compass into one direction. Then what do we do?" "I think," the hat said, slowly, "that is your choice. Not mine. The castle's heir chooses where to sit. That was always the arrangement, if there had been an heir to use it." Harry thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Not long enough to be dramatic but long enough to be genuine. He thought about Godric Gryffindor, pragmatic and warm, the one who charged at things directly. He thought about what that bloodline had given him and whether it matched the part of himself he recognized. "Gryffindor," he said. "Not because I was assigned there. Because I choose it." "Good," the hat said. "That's the difference." And then, louder than it had said anything that evening, louder than most people in the hall had ever heard it, "Gryffindor, and the castle recognizes her heir." The last part was not how the sorting hat worked. The last part had never happened before. Every person in the hall who knew anything about magic, which was nearly all of them, understood this immediately, and the silence that fell was the specific silence of a room full of people registering that something has just occurred that they don't have the framework for. Then the castle answered. The torches on the walls flared gold simultaneously, all of them, every torch in the great hall brightening by 3 orders of magnitude for exactly 3 seconds before settling to their normal level. Several of the portraits on the walls turned to look at Harry at the same time, the older ones, the ones painted close to the Founder's era, with expressions of recognition that had nothing to do with the painted subject's normal personality. The enchanted ceiling showed clear sky suddenly, all the clouds gone, the stars brilliant and sharp even though outside the weather had not changed. And deep below the hall, Harry felt it through the stone of the stool beneath him, through the floor, up through his feet when he stood, the anchor stone pulsed. Once, steady, like a heartbeat catching rhythm. The warmth of it ran up through the building like a current through a wire, and everything that was Hogwarts, every piece of the castle's vast and ancient intelligence, turned toward him and settled, with the absolute completeness of something finding true north. Harry took the hat off, set it back on the stool, and walked to the Gryffindor table. The silence broke into noise, not cheering exactly, more the sound of a very large number of people saying things to the people beside them simultaneously. He sat down next to Hermione, who was gripping the bench with both hands and wearing an expression he'd never seen from her before, something past impressed and into something more like wonder. "The ceiling cleared," she said. "I know. The portraits, the old ones, the ones from the Founder's era, I know. Harry." She looked at him directly. "The hat announced it. To the whole school. The castle recognizes her heir." "I heard. Dumbledore's face, tell me." She glanced up at the high table and then back with the speed of someone who had processed what she'd seen instantly. "He's smiling," she said. "Properly, warmly, very publicly. And his eyes are not smiling at all." Harry looked up at the high table for the first time since sitting down. Dumbledore was indeed wearing a warm grandfatherly expression, and indeed his eyes were doing something completely different, calculating, rapidly processing, the expression of a man who has just had a variable in his very long equation change without his permission. Around him the other professors were varying degrees of stunned. Snape had gone very still, which was its own kind of telling. McGonagall was staring at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite managing it. Quirrell was at the end of the table wearing a smile that was wrong in the specific way of someone feeling one thing while displaying another. Harry noted this. Harry had been noting Quirrell since he sat down. Neville appeared at Harry's other elbow, sliding into place at the Gryffindor table with the efficiency of someone who has decided where he belongs and is sitting there. He had heard the announcement, and his expression had the quality of someone whose understanding of a situation has just become considerably more complete. "So," he said quietly. "Everything you told us on the train." "Yes," Harry said. "And now everyone knows." "The ones who understand what the announcement meant," Harry said. "Which is the older students, the professors, anyone with proper magical education. The Muggleborns will find out tonight from their housemates." "Your plan," Hermione said quietly. "Does this change it?" "It accelerates it," Harry said. He picked up his fork as the sorting finished and the feast appeared, because he was 11 and had been on a train for 8 hours and was genuinely hungry. Everything that was going to happen eventually just got moved up. Which is fine. He served himself roast potatoes. "I prefer moving quickly." The Gryffindor dormitory was in the tower, as described, and the stairs spiraled in the way Harry's sketches had suggested, and the room had the good bones of genuine old architecture that had been thoughtfully maintained rather than blindly renovated. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment and felt the room, and the room, very clearly, felt him back, a brief wash of warmth, welcoming and specific, like a door opening. "It's greeting you," Neville said, from behind him. It wasn't a question. "Apparently. Does it do that everywhere?" "I think it'll do it everywhere I go in the building." Harry moved inside and sat on the nearest bed, testing the mattress. "Better than the Dursleys, though that was a low bar. I don't think the other students will be able to feel it. But portraits will react to me. Rooms will open more readily. The castle's magic will run a bit differently around me than around everyone else." Ron Weasley, who had been assigned the bed on the other side of the room, was listening to this with his mouth slightly open. Ron was the first of the 2 remaining beds. He was gangly and freckled and had the particular energy of someone with a great many siblings who had spent his entire life being the not special one and had arranged himself around this fact. He'd been watching Harry since the sorting with an expression that was trying to resolve the conflict between famous person and actual person and finding it harder than expected. "You're really the heir," he said. "Of all 4 founders." "Yes," Harry said. "And the castle is yours." "Technically." "Technically," Ron repeated. "Then, does that mean you could, like, change things? About the school? If I chose to." "Yes." Ron considered this. "Could you get rid of the moving staircases?" "I hate the moving staircases. 3rd step on the main staircase is a trick one, and it had me for a full minute this evening." Harry looked at him. Something about the complete practicality of this question in the middle of what should have been an awe-filled moment was the funniest thing anyone had said to him in weeks. "I'll look into it," he said. Ron nodded, satisfied, and went back to unpacking. Hermione, appearing briefly in the corridor outside, had the expression of someone who was going to say that is not the priority and was restraining herself admirably. Harry went to the window. The lake was dark below and the grounds were quiet and the sky had gone back to its proper cloud cover, the castle's announcement over, its point made. He could feel the building around him the way you feel a house when you've come home to it after a long time away, the particular comfort of knowing where every room is, even the ones you haven't been in yet. The pull from the Ravenclaw Tower was there, specific and patient. The feeling of the stone below the hall, the warmth of the anchor stone translated through 5 floors of old rock, was settled and content. He put his hand against the stone wall of the dormitory, lightly, not for anyone's benefit, just his own. Hello, he thought. The wall was warm under his palm and stayed warm longer than stone should, and the room around him was very quiet and very old and completely, absolutely his. Breakfast was loud in the way of mornings after significant events. Everyone had something to say about the sorting, the castle's response, the hat's announcement, and the fact that Harry Potter, the boy who lived, had apparently been walking around for the past 3 years as the secret owner of the school, which Dumbledore had certainly not mentioned in his welcoming address last night, which itself was very interesting. Harry ate his eggs and let the conversation happen around him and watched Dumbledore across the hall. The headmaster had performed his welcoming speech last night with the professional grace of a man who had just absorbed a significant surprise and was determined not to show it. He'd smiled at Harry, made a warm generalized comment about the castle's welcome, and segued into the ordinary business of school announcements. He had not, notably, made any reference to what the hat had said. He had not called Harry up. He had not, in any way, acknowledged the elephant, or the castle, or the legal and institutional earthquake that was technically in progress. He was waiting, Harry thought. Waiting to see what Harry would do. Waiting to assess the threat and decide on the response. This was, by every account Harry had of Dumbledore's patterns, exactly correct. So Harry was going to make him wait. He had a plan, and the plan required class time, observation, and 2 particular conversations before any formal moves were made. The first was with Quirrell. The second was with the castle itself. Classes were that afternoon. Thursday was double charms and then history of magic, and Harry went to them with his books and his genuine interest in the curriculum and the slightly disorienting experience of learning things he'd already read while sitting in the building that was watching him. Flitwick was excellent, small and precise and genuinely enthusiastic about his subject in the way of teachers who love what they do and haven't forgotten why. History of Magic, taught by the ghost of Professor Binns, was exactly as terrible as the book suggested, a dry, monotonous cataloguing of goblin rebellions delivered by someone who had died in front of a classroom and apparently not noticed. Harry took notes anyway. Not on what Binns said but on what he left out, which was considerable. Hermione, beside him, was taking notes on what Binns said and cross-referencing with 4 other sources simultaneously, which would have been distracting if it wasn't also impressive. Defense against the dark arts was with Quirrell, and Harry had been waiting for it with the particular patience of someone who knows they are going to see something important and is prepared to look carefully. Quirrell was performing an anxiety that was not entirely false. There was genuine anxiety there, layered over something much colder and much more deliberate. The turban was new since the summer, and it was on his head in a way that was not decorative. Harry had read about possession, about wraiths, about forms of parasitic magical existence, and he had a very clear hypothesis about the turban that he had discussed with Ragnarok in a letter 2 months ago, and Ragnarok had responded with a terse confirmation that the Gringotts intelligence network had similar suspicions. He sat in the defense classroom and watched Quirrell talk about dark creatures, vampires, today, which was ironic, with the surface-level nervousness that seemed to be his teaching mode, and underneath that, occasionally, when Quirrell forgot to maintain the performance, something quick and cold that moved behind his eyes like something else looking out. After class, Harry waited. Everyone filed out and Quirrell was already moving toward his desk with the deliberate purpose of someone who has something to do before the next class. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said. Quirrell turned. And for a moment, just a flicker, the thing behind his eyes looked at Harry directly. Not the professor. The other one. "Mr. Peapotter," Quirrell said. "Is there something I wanted to ask about the Warsaw Defense Protocols," Harry said. "You mentioned them briefly. The magical shielding techniques developed during the dark creature outbreak of 1782. I've read the original documentation but the spell theory isn't entirely clear in the secondary sources." A genuine question. Quirrell was, before everything else, a genuinely accomplished wizard and academic, and the question landed in his real professional vanity before he could stop it. He gave a legitimate answer, detailed, technically accurate, showing the real scholar underneath the performance, and Harry listened carefully and asked 2 more follow-up questions that required real answers, and the whole time he was watching the other thing behind the professor's eyes with the steady, measuring attention of someone doing an assessment. The thing behind the eyes was watching him back. Harry felt it, not legitimacy exactly, more a general pressure, like someone leaning against a door to feel whether anything was behind it. He let the pressure find his surface thoughts, the genuine curiosity about defense theory, the class notes, the next question he was preparing, and nothing else. After 3 minutes of this exchange, Harry smiled at Quirrell, thanked him for his time, and left. In the corridor, Hermione fell into step beside him from where she'd been waiting by the door, which he'd known she would be. "Well?" she whispered. "Confirmed," Harry said quietly. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet. I need one more piece of information first." He paused at the intersection of 2 corridors and looked right, where a narrow passage led toward the older part of the castle, the section that didn't appear in the official floor plan. "Tonight." "Tonight what?" Neville said, appearing on Harry's other side from a different direction, which suggested he'd been watching the classroom door too, which meant all 3 of them had independently decided to stake it out, which Harry found obscurely satisfying. "There's something under the school," Harry said. "Dumbledore had it moved here over the summer from Gringotts. I need to see it." "The Philosopher's Stone," Hermione said. He looked at her. She had the expression of someone who has completed an equation and is waiting for confirmation. "Yes," he said. "I read about the break-in at Gringotts," she said. "In August, Vault 713. The day after you were there. Ragnarok told you about the vault, didn't he? And when you cross-referenced the vault number with the class of protected object and the timing of Quirrell joining the staff, 2 months ago, Harry confirmed. In my letter. You've known since the summer, she said. Not accusing. Processing. What's the full picture? Voldemort is alive, Harry said, which was the kind of sentence that generally stopped conversations. Neville flinched at the name. Hermione's jaw tightened. Not properly, not a body, a form of possession. He's riding Quirrell. He wants the stone to regenerate a body. Dumbledore knows, or suspects, and has built a series of protections under the school to prevent access. He thinks the trap will catch whoever goes for it. Harry started walking. What Dumbledore doesn't account for is that the protections are in a section of the castle I have direct authority over, and a trap that's been set in my house without my knowledge is not a trap I'm obligated to respect. Neville said, after a moment, You're going to walk through Dumbledore's traps. I'm going to walk through my own corridors, Harry corrected. Tonight? Not tonight. Not yet. First, he stopped at a staircase and looked up, and they both followed his gaze to the upper tower. First I need to go and visit a room that's been waiting for me for 1,000 years. He went alone, because some things needed to be done alone, and because the castle made it easy. Doors that should have been locked were open, corridors that should have been awkward rearranged themselves helpfully. A portrait of a woman from the 1200s turned to look at him as he passed and gave him a single decisive nod. The Ravenclaw Tower was quiet at 11 at night, the common room below him empty, and he took the stairs past the 7th floor and past the 8th and found the 9th, which was technically not in the blueprints and which had a door that was not stone or wood but something that looked like solidified smoke, cool and faintly luminescent, which was, Harry noted, exactly the same material as the door to the Anchor Stone Vault. He pressed his hand flat to it. It opened. The room was round and high-ceilinged and smelled of something floral and faintly electrical, exactly as the dreams had described. The walls were lined with shelves and the shelves were full, not books exactly, more like crystallized containers of some kind, each one glowing faintly with the contained luminescence of stored magical knowledge. They were memory archives, Harry realized, the wizarding equivalent of a library stored in crystal rather than parchment. The floor had a mosaic that showed the night sky and the arrangement of stars, not any one night but all of them, cycling slowly. In the center of the room was a writing desk, and on the desk was a single book, and the book was open. He crossed to the desk and looked at the open page. It was written in 3 scripts, old runes, a cipher he recognized as Founders Era private notation, and English, the English added later in a different hand, a translation someone had done centuries after the original. The English said, "To the heir who finds this room, you carry what we built. We did not intend for it to be a burden. We argued, the 4 of us, about whether power should be inherited or earned, and we never resolved it. Rowena believed it should be earned. Salazar believed it was already inherent. Godric said the question was wrong because power means nothing without the decision about what to do with it. Helga made tea and said we were all being dramatic. The school is yours if you are reading this. We hope you are better than we were. We were not always good. We were often right, which is not the same thing. In the shelves, what we knew. Not all of it was published. Most of it was not. Take what you need. The room will wait as long as it takes. Use it well. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Harry stood in the room for a long moment, the slowly cycling stars moving under his feet and the crystalline archives glowing softly on the shelves, and felt the full weight of what had happened over the past 3 years settle into something that wasn't heavy at all. It felt like standing on solid ground after a long time on uncertain terrain, the specific relief of weight being properly distributed. He pulled up the chair, sat down, and opened the nearest crystal archive. He stayed until 3 in the morning. When he finally went back down through the sleeping castle, through the warm stone corridors that made way for him quietly and without fuss, he stopped once at a window that looked out over the dark grounds and the lake and felt the anchor stone's warmth below him, steady and continuous, and said, not out loud but clearly, "I understand now what you've been keeping. I'll keep it properly." The warmth deepened, briefly, and then settled, content. He went to bed and slept without dreaming, which was its own kind of rest, the rest of someone who no longer needs to reach towards something because they are already there. Chapter 4. The castle remembers the first thing Harry did on Friday morning was go to the library. Not the student library, the one everyone used, with its organized sections and Madame Pants guarding the restricted shelf like a territorial bird. He went to the room 3 floors below the Ravenclaw archive, the one the castle had shown him in a dream 4 months ago and which he'd found last night on his way back from Rowena's room. It had no official designation. The door was in a section of wall that the second-floor corridor presented as blank stone to everyone else and as an obvious door to him, which he found he was already taking for granted with the naturalness of someone accepting a gift that feels predestined. Inside was a room that had not been properly used in approximately 3 centuries. Dust on the shelves. Cobwebs in the corners. But the books were intact, preserved by the same passive enchantments that kept the entire castle from crumbling under the weight of its own age, and they were the books that didn't exist in any catalogue. The books that had never been catalogued because the person who would have catalogued them hadn't existed. Harry set his bag down on a table that shook loose a small cloud of dust and started reading the spines. Hermione found him 40 minutes later. She appeared in the doorway, looked at the room, looked at him, and said, "How?" "The castle showed me. There's no door from the corridor." "There is if you're me." She came inside slowly, the way you approach something you're not sure is real in case approaching it too fast breaks it. She ran her finger along a shelf and examined the dust. "These haven't been touched in centuries. Closer to 300 years for this room. The Ravenclaw archive upstairs has been sealed for longer." He pulled a volume from the shelf and turned it to show her the spine. "This is a complete text on animagus transformation that predates the Ministry classification system. The current approved texts leave out about 40% of the theory." She took it from him very carefully, the way she handled all old books, with a reverence that Harry shared though he was better at concealing it. She opened to a middle page and read for 30 seconds and then looked up with the expression of someone who has just been handed something extraordinary. "This is, I know. Harry, this contradicts 4 things in the standard curriculum." "7 things," he said. "I counted." She sat down. She didn't say anything else for 2 full minutes while she read, which was the Hermione Granger version of being speechless. Harry went back to his own reading, pulling volumes at intervals and stacking them in a growing pile beside his bag. Neville appeared at 9, trailed by Ron, who had apparently been in the corridor when Neville came looking for the library and had attached himself with the opportunistic loyalty of someone who recognizes interesting things happening and wants to be near them. "You have a secret library," Ron said, looking around. "It's not secret," Harry said. "It just requires a specific person to access. That's basically the definition of secret." "Fair," Harry allowed. "Can anyone else get in?" "I don't know yet. Try going out and coming back in." Ron went out. There was a pause. He came back in. "I just walked through a door," he said, somewhat deflated. "The castle must like you," Harry said. Ron looked around the room with a revised expression, pleased, and trying not to show it. "It's a bit dusty," he offered. "We'll sort that." Neville had gone immediately to the shelves and was moving along them with a focus that was becoming familiar, the sharp-eyed, quietly absorbed Neville that emerged when something interested him enough to bypass the apologetic exterior. He pulled a volume about herbological applications in advanced magical construction and said, without turning around, "This is about Hufflepuff's greenhouse protocols. The original ones. Gran has a reference to these in a letter she found in the family archive. She always thought the original text was lost. We can get it copied if you want," Harry said. Neville turned around. He had the expression of someone who keeps being surprised by something they should have adjusted to by now. "You can do that?" "It's my library." Ron said, "Can I have a copy of whatever is in here about chess strategy? Because if there's a magical theory section I feel like there might be, Ron," Hermione said, from behind her book. "Worth asking," Ron said, unabashed. By the end of the first week, Harry had established a pattern that served multiple purposes simultaneously. He was attending all his classes and doing well in them, which was the surface layer, the part visible to professors and prefects and whatever observational attention Dumbledore was paying, which Harry assumed was considerable. Below that, he was systematically building a map of everything that was wrong. The castle showed him things. Not dramatically, it didn't produce signs or manifestations, nothing as obvious as the torch flare in the Great Hall. It worked more like the way a familiar house guides you, a door easier to push than it should be, a turn that felt right rather than left, a warmth along a particular section of corridor that said "look here." He followed these promptings with the attentiveness of someone who trusts their source, and what he found, over the first 3 weeks of term, was deeply and specifically alarming. The school's protective wards were degraded. Not naturally, not the gradual erosion of time, which the castle compensated for automatically. Something active had been interfering. Specific ward nodes, which in Hogwarts' original architecture were physical fixtures, stones, keystones, embedded enchantments in door frames and window casements, had been systematically drained. Not removed, that would have been noticeable. Drained, the way you drain a battery, carefully, gradually, over a long period, leaving the shell intact while removing the function. Harry identified 11 compromised ward nodes in the first week alone. By the third week he had 23. They followed a specific pattern, forming a rough hexagonal outline on the castle's internal map, and the geometry of it was not accidental. Someone had been creating a vulnerability zone. A section of the castle where the protections were thin enough to permit something to enter or to amplify a spell to a scale that would otherwise be impossible. The section included the third-floor corridor. He'd had Hermione verify his findings through research, framed carefully as academic curiosity about Hogwarts' protective architecture, and she'd confirmed the theory from the legitimate side. The ward structure she could find documented evidence of did show an anomaly consistent with what he was describing. She sat across from him in the hidden library on a Saturday afternoon in late September with a considerable stack of reference materials and a face that had moved past alarm into the focused intensity that was her response to serious problems. "Someone's been doing this for years," she said. This isn't recent interference. The degradation pattern in the northern ward chain is at least 5 years old. It started after 1986, Harry said. After Voldemort's fall. Someone who had access to the castle, who knew the ward architecture, who knew what they were doing and had time to do it gradually without triggering any automatic alarms. A staff member, she said. A specific staff member. She met his eyes. Quirrell only joined this summer. Yes, Harry said. A silence. Someone else, then. Someone who was here already. Who has been here? There are 8 members of the permanent staff who were employed before 1986 and have remained continuously. He pushed across a handwritten list. I've been cross-referencing access patterns with the specific ward nodes affected. The geometry of the vulnerability zone requires someone with movement across the entire castle, not just one wing or floor. Hermione studied the list. Her finger stopped at one name. Harry nodded. That's, she started. Significant, he agreed. Yes. She put the list down. Are you going to tell Dumbledore? I'm going to confirm it first, Harry said. And then I'm not going to tell Dumbledore. Dumbledore is managing this situation according to his own priorities, which are not mine. He knows about the stone. He knows about Quirrell, or suspects strongly. He thinks the trap he's built will handle it. He paused. What he doesn't know is that someone else has been weakening this building, and he doesn't know that I know either of those things, and both of those facts are currently useful. You're going to let him think he's handling it, Hermione said slowly, while you do something else. I'm going to let him think he's handling it while I handle it. She was quiet for a moment. The stone itself, she said. The trap. When? After Halloween, Harry said. Something's going to happen at Halloween. I don't know what yet, but Quirrell's been spending a great deal of time in the third-floor corridor after curfew, the castle tells me, and the convergence of the degraded wards and Quirrell's access pattern suggests he's preparing something. He looked up. And I'm going to let him almost do it, because I need to understand the full shape of the problem before I cut it off. Hermione's expression contained a trace of something that wasn't quite discomfort but was adjacent to it. That means whatever happens at Halloween happens. Hermione, Harry said, not unkindly. I can prevent the specific incident. I can block Quirrell tonight and it would delay things by weeks, maybe months, while the underlying situation stays unresolved. Or I can wait 2 weeks, understand the complete picture, and resolve the whole thing cleanly. Clean isn't always possible, she said. It was, he recognized, genuine pushback rather than automatic agreement, and he respected it accordingly. You're right, he said. It might not be. But the strategy is still correct. A beat. And Neville agrees. She looked at Neville, who was on the other side of the table doing something with herbological cross-references and who looked up when his name appeared. He met her eyes steadily. He's right about the timeline, Neville said. I've been thinking about it since Tuesday. A pause, then, in the careful way of someone selecting words, sometimes you have to let something play out to know what you're really dealing with. Something in his voice suggested this knowledge was personal rather than strategic. Hermione looked at him for a moment and then nodded, once, the nod of someone updating their position based on new input. All right, she said. Halloween. The troll came through the main doors at 7:30 on the evening of October 31st, exactly when it shouldn't have been able to, because the entrance wards would, under normal circumstances, have prevented any dark creature above a Class 2 rating from crossing the school's threshold. The entrance wards were part of the vulnerability zone. Harry was already in the corridor when it happened, which surprised everyone and should have surprised no one. He'd told Neville and Hermione at dinner that the wards were going to fail tonight, had felt it since morning, the castle running a low anxious vibration through the stone the way a house sounds different when something's wrong with the plumbing, and he'd positioned them near the exit they would need while the feast was in full swing. The troll was 12 feet tall and smelled of old meat and something sulphurous, and it walked into the entrance hall with the particular confidence of a creature that has been pointed at a location and given simple instructions. Not wild. Directed. Someone had opened the door for it and someone had given it a heading, and it was moving with dull, purposeful determination toward the lower dungeons. The students in the entrance hall erupted immediately, which was expected. The teachers swept toward the doors from the Great Hall, which was expected. The instructed chaos of a controlled crisis, Harry thought. Quirrell, who had presumably arranged this, was still inside the hall, performing alarm, keeping himself visible. The troll was meant to be a distraction. And if it was a distraction, that meant something else was happening right now, somewhere else. Neville, Harry said, sharp and quiet. Find where Quirrell goes. Don't approach him. Just see where he goes. Neville moved. He had the particular capacity for invisibility that belongs to people who have spent their lives taking up less space than they should. He could be unobtrusive with an efficiency that was almost its own skill, and he slipped through the panicking crowd and was gone. Hermione, Harry said. The wards. The northern node, the one adjacent to the third-floor entrance. I need you to hold it stable for 10 minutes. I don't know how to. Yes you do. You read the Hufflepuff ward text last week, the one about node maintenance. You thought it was theoretical. It's not. He met her eyes. You can do this. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, recalibrating. Where's the node? Third floor corridor, left side, 4th stone from the junction. Put your hand on it and push. He reached into his bag, which he'd brought from the library that afternoon, and handed her a small stone disc inscribed with runes. This will help channel it. Hold it against the node and push. You'll feel what to do. She took it and went. Harry turned to the troll. It had stopped in the entrance hall because the flood of students had momentarily confused it. Trolls navigate by smell primarily, and 100 panicking children produced a sensory overload. It was swinging its club with the disoriented fury of something overwhelmed, and students were pressing back against the walls, and 2 prefects were attempting spells with the very limited effectiveness of people who know the spell but have never used it for something that was actually trying to hit them. Harry walked into the middle of the entrance hall. The noise was considerable. The troll turned toward him when he moved. He was, relative to the pressed-back crowd, in open space, which made him the most visible thing in the room. It raised its club. It was the specific variety of 12-foot mountain troll that had a particular weakness in its auditory processing, overwhelmingly sensitive to a specific frequency range, something Harry had read in a book that Madame Pants had definitely not approved for first-year reading. He had a reasonable voice. And the castle had very particular acoustic properties. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and produced a whistle that was not quite human in pitch, not quite animal, something that landed in the specific frequency register that the goblin text had described. He held it for 3 seconds, changing the pitch twice, using the ceiling of the entrance hall the way a musician uses a concert hall's natural reverb. The troll stopped. Not stunned. Its eyes went unfocused, a flinch of pain worked across its gray face. It shook its head once. The club dropped 3 inches. Its confusion deepened from navigational to fundamental. Down, Harry said, in the flat, carrying tone he'd been practicing since August, using the specific resonance that the castle's acoustic properties amplified naturally. Not a shout. Projected. Clear. The troll sat down. Not obediently, trolls don't do obedient. It sat because its legs stopped working correctly when the resonance hit its inner ear, and sitting was what happened next. From the perimeter of the hall, 5 adult wizards with raised wands stared at the 11-year-old boy standing in the middle of the entrance hall in front of a sitting troll. Harry turned to the nearest professor, Flitwick, who had gone pale but whose wand was steady. "Professor," he said. "Binding charm, please. Something durable. I need to go." Flitwick, with the automatic reflex of an extremely competent person responding to a clear instruction, cast the binding charm. The troll was secured before it recovered its equilibrium. Harry was already moving for the stairs. McGonagall's voice cut after him, "Potter, the troll was a distraction," Harry called back, without slowing. "Quirrell is in the third-floor corridor. Don't follow me, and please don't send anyone to the third floor yet. I'll explain everything when I come back." He went up the stairs 3 at a time. Hermione was at the ward node when he reached the third floor, exactly where he directed her, her hand flat against the fourth stone from the junction with her teeth set and her eyes focused somewhere internal. The disc was against the stone and a faint blue light was leaking from the contact point, steady and even. "Is it working?" he said. "Yes," she said, slightly breathless. "You were right. I could feel what to do. It's like the ward is trying to do it itself and I'm just helping it." A pause. "It's remarkable, actually. Can you hold it another 5 minutes?" "Yes." He went past her and down the corridor. The door to the restricted staircase was open, not forced, opened with a key, which Quirrell had presumably acquired or duplicated. Harry went through it and down the short passage and through the next door, which opened for him without key or charm, simply opened, because it was his corridor and the castle knew it. The room with the three-headed dog was, in the original architectural plans, a transition room, not a storage room, which is what Dumbledore had apparently used it as. It was a buffer space between the inhabited castle and the deeper passages beneath, which were original Founders-era construction and had been sealed for nearly 5 centuries. The dog was Dumbledore's addition. The trapdoor was Dumbledore's modification to an original access point. The dog was asleep when Harry entered. Not naturally asleep, something had been used to put it under, a reed pipe discarded by the door, and Quirrell was already through the trapdoor. Harry looked at the dog for a moment. It was enormous and probably terrifying under normal circumstances, and he felt an instinctive sympathy for something magnificent being used as a lock, and went to the trapdoor. He dropped through. The devil's snare was below, and this was the point at which Hermione holding the ward node mattered, because devil's snare responds to the ambient magic of its environment, and in a degraded ward zone it grew faster and clung harder. With the node held, the ambient magic was closer to the castle's natural register, and the devil's snare's response to Harry was slower than it would have been to anyone else. Also, it was his castle, and the castle told the plant, in whatever wordless language it used for such communications, to be calm. The plant released him before it had fully grabbed. Through the next chamber, a room with flying keys and a broomstick, and Harry didn't take the broom. He stood in the middle of the room and the castle did something subtle with the air currents, and the correct key came to him as naturally as if he'd held his hand out to catch falling rain. He caught it, unlocked the door, went through. Chess room next. The giant chess set was arranged in its challenge position and the pieces turned to look at him, and then they moved aside. Simply moved, the whole configuration reorganizing itself to create a clear path to the opposite door, because they were enchanted by a witch who had been given permission to enchant things in Hogwarts by a headmaster who did not own it, and ownership, it turned out, superseded permission. Harry walked straight through. The troll room, the troll was already unconscious. Quirrell's work. Harry stepped over it. The fire obstacle, purple and black flames blocking the final doors. Not a problem, the castle showed him the suppression point, a specific stone in the floor, and he pressed his heel against it and the flames died on that side. He walked through cool air. The mirror of Erised was in the final chamber and Quirrell was already there. He was standing before the mirror with his wand out and his shoulders tight and wrong, and as Harry came through the door Quirrell turned, and the performance was gone. All of it, the stammer, the nervous tics, the carefully constructed persona of an anxious academic. What turned to face Harry was something collected and cold and much older than the man it wore. "You," Quirrell said, in a voice that had shed the stammer entirely. "A child. He said you might come." "He's correct," Harry said, walking forward at a measured pace that didn't stop when Quirrell raised his wand. "Stop," Quirrell said. Harry stopped, but voluntarily, at a distance of 10 feet, because 10 feet was the distance he'd chosen, not because Quirrell's wand was compelling. "The stone is in the mirror," Harry said. "And you've been staring at it for, how long?" Quirrell's jaw tightened. "I know the stone is in the mirror. I cannot extract it." "I know," Harry said. "Dumbledore designed the mirror enchantment so that the stone is only accessible to someone who wants to find it but not to use it. You want to use it. It will show you what you want, the stone in your pocket, but it will never actually give it to you." He tilted his head. "He's clever. You have to give him that." "And you?" Quirrell said, and the voice beneath his voice, the cold one, the one that had been watching Harry from behind Quirrell's eyes for 3 weeks, was paying very close attention. "Can you extract it?" "Probably," Harry said. "Though I won't be giving it to you." "Lord Voldemort wishes to speak with you," Quirrell said, and the name landed with the weight of a practiced weapon. "I know," Harry said. "Bring him out, then." Quirrell's eyes flickered. A slight uncertainty. "You are not afraid?" "No. You are 11 years old." "I'm aware." The uncertainty shifted into something that might have been, in another context, professional appreciation. Quirrell turned his back on Harry and reached for his turban, unwinding it with deliberate movements, revealing the face on the back of his head, white and noseless and red-eyed and fixed on Harry with an attention that had the specific quality of something evaluating something else's threat level. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, from the back of Quirrell's skull. His voice was thin with disuse, reed soft, but the intelligence in it was immediate and genuine. "You are not what I expected." "No one ever is," Harry said, looking at him directly. "Not at Quirrell. At the face. You should know, you have been trying to access a stone in a chamber inside a castle that is legally mine. Without my permission. Using a member of staff that you've been running as a puppet inside my school." A pause. "Your school," Voldemort said. "The Founder Inheritance. All 4 lines. I've had the Gringotts certification for 3 years." Harry kept his voice conversational. "You would have been welcome to make an appointment." Something moved across Voldemort's features, a flicker that was, astonishingly, close to amusement. "You have a Slytherin's nerve," he said. "Curious, for the Gryffindor heir." "I have all 4 lines," Harry said. "I pick what I need based on the situation." "And what the situation needs," Voldemort said, his voice sharpening, "is for you to step aside. I have no quarrel with you, Potter. My quarrel is with the dead. You are young and powerful and, no," Harry said. A silence. "No," Harry said again, pleasantly. "I'm not interested in a negotiation. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not going to step aside and I'm not going to be recruited. You are a wraith wearing a professor's skull and you have been damaging my castle for 3 months through a proxy, and I am profoundly unimpressed." He walked forward, 3 steps, closing the distance to 7 feet. Quirrell's wand was still up. Harry's wand was in his pocket. "Here is what is going to happen. I'm going to take the stone from the mirror. I'm going to give it to Ragnarok for safekeeping until a better solution for its destruction is arranged. Quirrell is going to be transported to Street Mungos where the possession will be addressed. You are going to leave, in whatever form you leave in, and we are going to have a much longer conversation about this when you are in a condition to have one properly." Quirrell attacked. The spell was fast and genuinely powerful. Quirrell had always been, an accomplished duelist before Voldemort, and whatever the possession gave him it added raw power to existing skill. The curse was a killing curse, non-verbal, which required extraordinary skill to cast and significant intent. Harry stepped aside. Not dramatically. Just aside, a half-step, almost casual, with the ease of someone who'd been studying movement patterns for 3 years and who had, additionally, an extremely acute spatial awareness that the castle enhanced in this moment by tightening the room's resonance around him like an extra sense, giving him every surface's angle and every air current and the exact position of Quirrell's wand before the spell finished forming. The green light hit the wall behind him and dissipated. "That was your one free attempt," Harry said. He drew his wand. He was not a trained duelist. He was 11. But he had read things no 11-year-old should have access to, and the Founder's archive had contained defensive magical theory that predated the current classification of offensive and defensive magic entirely, predated the categories, worked on entirely different principles that the modern curriculum, Hermione had noted, had a significant theoretical gap around. He cast 3 spells in sequence, all non-verbal, all unfamiliar to anything in the modern curriculum, and the effect was not a knockback or a binding or a curse. It was a disruption, targeted at the connection between Quirrell and the entity riding him, the specific magical interface of the possession, weakening the grip without attacking Quirrell himself, which mattered because Quirrell was a person and Harry was not interested in hurting the person. The effect was immediate and alarming for Voldemort. The red eyes on the back of Quirrell's skull went wide with something genuine, not fear exactly, but the surprise of someone encountering a tool they didn't know existed. Quirrell gasped. His wand dropped an inch. Harry closed the distance and put his hand on Quirrell's arm, which he'd been told in 3 separate historical texts would be profoundly uncomfortable for the possessing entity. The contact of the Founder convergent air was, apparently, the magical equivalent of a grounding rod for anything parasitic, and the effect was everything the texts had predicted. Quirrell screamed. Voldemort screamed, which was quieter but somehow worse. Quirrell's arm where Harry touched it went white and then began to crack, the skin fracturing like overheated ceramic, and Harry pulled his hand back because that was enough. The disruption spells had done their work, and Quirrell was collapsing. The red-eyed face screamed and was gone, spiraling upward, formless, dispersed. Not dead. He'd told Hermione and Neville from the beginning, Voldemort wouldn't die tonight. Wasn't ready to. The stone hadn't been used. The body wasn't here. He'd survive as a wraith and find another host and come back, properly, in his own time, and that was a problem for later. What mattered tonight was that he was gone from Quirrell, and Quirrell was on the floor, and the stone was in the mirror. Harry turned to the mirror. He looked into it. His reflection looked back, himself, just himself, no elaboration, because what he wanted was simply to have the stone safely put away, and his reflection reached into a pocket and the stone appeared in his actual hand, just like that, exactly as Dumbledore had designed, and Harry thought, with something like grudging respect, clever. He held the stone. A small red stone, warm, unremarkable looking. An enormous amount of power and consequence in one hand. He closed his fingers around it. "Good work," he said to Quirrell's unconscious body, which was not sarcastic but genuine. The man was a victim as much as a vehicle, and Harry's first letter out of here would be about getting him proper care. Then he turned around and went back through the flames. Dumbledore was at the top of the trapdoor. Not with a crowd, alone, which meant he'd known, had been watching somehow, had come when the situation reached its conclusion rather than its crisis. He stood in the transition room with the sleeping 3-headed dog and looked down at Harry climbing up from the passage below, and his expression was very carefully composed. Harry climbed out. He stood in front of the most powerful wizard in Britain and held the stone out in his closed fist and met the blue eyes without blinking. "Well," Dumbledore said, after a moment. "Quirrell is in the mirror room," Harry said. "He'll need medical care. Voldemort was possessing him, is no longer, as of about 10 minutes ago. Quirrell may or may not recover full function. I'd recommend St. Mungo's immediately." "Yes," Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry's closed fist. "The stone," Harry said, "is going to Gringotts. Not back to Nicholas Flamel, that's the plan I've gathered you had in mind, but to a Gringotts security vault under my direct authorization, until Flamel can be contacted about a permanent solution." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "He's been alive for 600 years. He can wait a few weeks for a conversation." "Harry," Dumbledore said, in the tone of a man selecting his approach very carefully. You have done something remarkable tonight. Truly. But the stone requires, I know what it requires, Harry said. I've known what it requires since August, which is when I figured out it was here. I've known it was here since Ragnarok confirmed the Gringotts break-in was an inside job and that the stone had been moved. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I've also known about the degraded ward nodes for 3 weeks. 23 compromised protection points. Someone on your staff has been doing it for years. I have documentation. The quality of Dumbledore's composure shifted. Not broken, men like Dumbledore don't break composure, but recalibrated, recalculating, the rapid internal arithmetic of someone adjusting to new information. The ward degradation, he said. I know who, Harry said. I know the access pattern, I know the timeline, I know what the vulnerability zone was being set up for. I'll share all of it. Transparently, freely, because it's information that affects the safety of my school and I don't play games with that. A pause, letting that word land, my. But I think we should probably sit down for that conversation. Tonight, if you're available. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who has been playing a particular game for 40 years and has just had the board rearranged by someone he thought he understood. I think, Dumbledore said slowly, that I have significantly underestimated you. Yes, Harry said, without heat or satisfaction, just matter of fact. You have. It happens. Shall we go? He walked toward the door. Behind him, after a moment, he heard Dumbledore follow. The castle was warm around him, every wall, every floor, the specific warmth of an ancient thing that had watched something go right after a very long time of watching things go wrong. The torches in the corridor brightened slightly as Harry walked, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for him to feel it, the steady approval of something vast and old and entirely on his side. He walked through his castle with the stone in his hand and his plans in order and 3 friends who knew the whole truth, and the thing that Dumbledore would not understand until much later, maybe never, was that this had never been about the stone or the traps or even Voldemort. It was about what happened next. And Harry had been preparing for that for 3 years. Chapter 5, What's Mine? The meeting with Dumbledore lasted 4 hours. It took place in his office, which was circular and full of the particular clutter of a very long and very active life, instruments Harry didn't have names for yet spinning and clicking on their shelves, portraits of previous headmasters pretending to sleep with varying degrees of success, Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch looking at Harry with the clear-eyed attention of something that has seen enough centuries to recognize significant moments. Harry sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk with his hands folded and his notes on the ward degradation spread out between them and talked for 4 hours. He told Dumbledore everything he'd found about the ward nodes. Every location, every timeline estimate, the geometric pattern of the vulnerability zone, the access record cross-reference he'd compiled. He didn't withhold anything because withholding it served no one, the castle's safety was not a negotiating chip and he refused to treat it as one. He did not, however, tell Dumbledore everything else. He kept the Ravenclaw archive. He kept the full scope of the founder inheritance documentation. He kept his plans for the Wizengamot, which were still forming, and the 3 pre-written letters in his trunk that waited only for the right moment. Dumbledore listened. He was, beneath everything, a brilliant man, and brilliant men in possession of new information are at their best when the information is laid out clearly and without agenda. He asked good questions. Harry answered them. They mapped the degradation together on a piece of parchment and Dumbledore went very still when the complete picture emerged. This is a year's work at minimum, Dumbledore said. Someone with sustained access and considerable skill. Yes, Harry said. I have a suspect. The access pattern and the specific knowledge of the ward architecture required narrows it considerably. But I want another 2 weeks to confirm before naming anyone, because naming the wrong person damages the school more than waiting damages the investigation. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk with an expression that Harry had not seen from him yet, not the warm grandfather, not the calculating strategist, but something more genuine than either. The look of a man setting aside a prepared response because the actual situation has turned out to be different enough from his expectations to require starting again. "Who taught you to think like this?" Dumbledore asked. "Ragnarok," Harry said. "And the Founders?" "The Founders. Their archive. In the Ravenclaw Tower." Harry watched Dumbledore's face. The headmaster went very still in the way of someone receiving information they had not expected and are deciding, in real time, whether to reveal that they had not expected it. He kept his expression neutral, which told Harry he had not known about the archive. Rowena Ravenclaw left a room. "It's been waiting for the heir. I found it on my second night here." "What is in it?" Dumbledore asked. "Privately," Harry said, pleasantly, "that's my business." A silence. Not hostile, they were past hostility, had moved into something more like mutual recognition. Dumbledore steepled his fingers. "You are a remarkable young man," he said, and this time the warmth in it was real, which made it more complicated than the performed warmth. "I'm 11, Harry said. "Mostly I've just had time to read." Fawkes made a sound from his perch, a low, melodic note, the phoenix equivalent of amusement, and Dumbledore's mouth curved very slightly. "About your living situation," he said. "The Dursleys. Gringotts addressed it 2 years ago," Harry said. "It's better now. Not warm, but functional." He paused. "I know why you placed me there." Dumbledore's expression shifted. "Harry, the blood protection. My mother's sacrifice, anchored through her sister. I've read the theory. I understand the logic." He met the blue eyes steadily. "I don't agree that it justified 7 years of what it was before Ragnarok's intervention, but I understand it wasn't malicious. You were managing a war's aftermath with incomplete information and imperfect tools, and you made choices that hurt people, and I think you know that." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The silence had a different quality to it than his normal silences, less calculated, more genuine. "You are remarkably generous," he said. "I'm practical," Harry said. "Anger about the past is expensive and I have things to do." He left the office at 2 in the morning with the ward degradation documented, a tentative agreement about the stone's transfer to Gringotts that Dumbledore had resisted and then conceded with the grace of someone choosing battles, and a clear sense of the shape of their relationship going forward. Not adversarial. Not the warm mentor-student thing Dumbledore had probably intended. Something more like two people who understood each other's positions and were choosing, provisionally, to work in the same direction. He trusted Dumbledore about as far as you should trust someone who had placed you in a cupboard for 7 years with good intentions. Which was not very far, but was farther than 0. The stone went to Gringotts 3 days later, escorted by Ragnarok personally, with a certified transfer document that Harry signed as the school's true custodian. Dumbledore signed as well, which was the first time the headmaster had formally acknowledged Harry's legal status in writing, and Harry noted this with satisfaction and filed the document carefully. Quirrell was at St. Mungo's by morning after the night of the stone. He lived. The possession had done significant neurological damage that the healers were cautiously optimistic about, which was better than the alternative. Harry visited twice and brought books, which Quirrell seemed to appreciate in the way of someone who needed evidence that the person visiting them was not angry. "You saved my life," Quirrell said, on the second visit, in a voice that was still fragile from the trauma of the separation. "I stopped the possession," Harry said. "Which was the right thing to do regardless. Most people would have," Quirrell stopped. "The killing curse that if you had, I stepped aside," Harry said. "You were possessed. I was never going to hold that against you." Quirrell looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone rebuilding their understanding of a situation from the ground up. "What are you?" he said, not rudely, genuinely. "Complicated," Harry said. "Get better." November was Quidditch tryouts and Hermione's library schedule, and Neville discovering that the hidden library contained 2 volumes on advanced herbology that were making him talk faster than Harry had ever heard him talk, which was its own kind of wonderful. Ron was teaching Harry chess, which Harry was learning at a rate that Ron found simultaneously gratifying and alarming. "You're going to beat me by Christmas," Ron said, staring at the board. "February," Harry said. "You're better than you think." "You're better than you think," Ron said, is something people say when they want to sound nice while actually saying you're better than them. "I'm not better than you yet. You see the board in 3 dimensions. I see it in 2.5. Harry moved a knight. February. Ron moved a bishop with the automatic confidence of someone who has grown up speaking this particular language. "The Gryffindor team wants you on it," he said. "Oliver Wood has been watching you in the courtyard." Harry had been doing casual flying in the courtyard after dinner, not practicing, exactly, just flying, because flying was the thing he'd discovered at 10 years old when Ragnarok had arranged for a broom to be purchased and he'd gone up for the first time and found that the air did for him what the stone did, the same rightness, the same clarity. He hadn't chased it as a performance. He'd just been flying. "Tell Wood I'll try out," Harry said. "He's going to put you at Seeker." "Probably. You don't mind?" Harry looked at him. "Why would I mind? Some people would mind being put at the position you're good enough for any. Seeker is the most interesting position," Harry said. "You can see the whole game from up there." Ron pointed at him with a chess piece. "See, that right there? That's the thing that makes you alarming." Harry smiled and moved his rook. The Quidditch tryout happened on a cold Wednesday in November and Oliver Wood was, as predicted, intensely focused and slightly terrifying about it in the way of people for whom sport is a moral issue. Harry flew. He was good, better than he had any formal right to be, with his informal practice hours and his natural spatial sense that the castle consistently sharpened, and he caught the practice snitch in 4 minutes and was told he was starting Seeker before he'd landed. Wood shook his hand with enormous solemnity. Harry thanked him and resisted the urge to mention that he'd noticed 3 specific improvements Wood could make to the team's formation strategy if he redistributed the chaser's approach angle. He kept that for later. Trust was built in stages. He told Hermione about the Quidditch position at dinner and she said, "Good, because you've been flying instead of doing your charms essay," which was not accurate and they both knew it, and he found her the source she needed for the 3rd paragraph of her own charms essay, and she accepted this without acknowledgement because they had the kind of friendship that communicated in evidence rather than sentiment. Neville said, "Can I come to the matches?" which he then immediately corrected to, "I'll be there anyway, everyone goes, is it all right if I cheer specifically for you?" And Harry said, "Obviously," and Neville went slightly red and changed the subject to herbology. Ron simply said, "Finally, now I don't have to explain to Fred and George that you weren't trying out because of reasons and could they stop asking," which communicated approximately 4 different things simultaneously and all of them were affectionate. December arrived with the cold specificity of Scottish winter and 2 developments that Harry had been tracking with careful attention converging into something that required action. The first was the ward saboteur. Harry had been watching for 6 weeks. He'd narrowed the access pattern to 2 possible staff members and then to 1, and the one was so startling that he'd spent 2 weeks doubting his own analysis before the evidence became undeniable. On the night of December 4th, at 11:15, he was in the hidden corridor behind the 3rd-floor junction with his cloak, the Peveril cloak, which Ragnarok had quietly transferred to him in October, which was not like any invisibility cloak he'd read descriptions of, it was something else, something older and more thorough. And he watched through a gap in the stone where the wall joined a doorframe as Argus Filch knelt beside a ward node and did something small and precise and deliberate to it. Filch. The caretaker. Harry had been through the logic so many times he could recite it. Filch was a squib, no direct magical ability, which was precisely why no one would suspect him and precisely why the ward degradation had been so methodical and so slow. He wasn't doing magic to the nodes. He was doing something physical, a tool-based process he'd clearly been taught by someone else, a mechanical disruption that produced a magical effect without requiring the person doing it to be magical themselves. It was elegant in a very cold way. It was also, Harry had eventually worked out, being done under instruction. Filch was not the architect of this, he was the instrument. The question was who had given him the instructions. Harry watched Filch finish, stand up, and go back down the corridor with his lamp and his dragging step, and waited until he was gone. Then he crouched by the node, examined what had been done, and reversed it, the castle showing him how with the same easy guidance it always used, as if the reversal was simply a matter of remembering how it had been. He sat in the corridor after, back against the wall, and thought about Filch. Filch was not a bad person. Harry had read him carefully over the first 3 months, the particular bitterness of a squib employed in a magical institution, the compensatory harshness, the genuine love of the building that showed in how he maintained it even while someone had been using him to damage it. He was being used, Harry thought. Maybe coerced. Maybe deceived into thinking the ward modifications were legitimate maintenance work. Whoever gave Filch his instructions, Harry needed to know before he moved. He went back to the dormitory and lay in the dark and made a list of everyone with both the motive and the knowledge to design what Filch had been executing. The list was not long. The name at the top of it was one he'd suspected for a month and resisted because it was the most uncomfortable possibility. He went to Ragnarok by owl the next morning. The response came back within the day, a sealed letter by the Gringotts courier owl, marked eyes only, which Harry read in the hidden library with the door shut. Ragnarok's intelligence network had confirmed it. Harry sat with the letter for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the leather folio with the other significant documents and started working on a different set of plans. Not the ones he'd been building since the summer, more immediate ones, the ones that required the political machinery rather than the investigative groundwork. He wrote 3 letters that evening. One to Ragnarok. One to the office of the Wisengamot, formally and correctly filed under the authority of the true custodian of Hogwarts, requesting a hearing date before the winter break. One to a solicitor in Diagon Alley that Ragnarok had identified, a woman named Cornelia Fawcett who specialized in both magical property law and the ancient claims of hereditary wizarding houses, and who had apparently been waiting for this call since approximately 1981. He sealed all 3 with the Lord of Four Houses signet that Ragnarok had pressed into his hand at their second meeting in October, a ring of dark metal set with 4 stones in the founder colors, understated and ancient and weighty in the hand in the way of things that have been significant for a very long time. He went back to the common room and sat down beside Hermione, who was reading, and said, quietly, "I know who's been sabotaging the wards." She put down her book immediately. Neville looked up from his herbology notes. Ron, across the room, caught something in Harry's tone and put his chess piece down. Harry told them. All 4 of them, in the quiet corner of the Gryffindor common room with the fire going and the castle warm around them, got the full picture for the first time. Not just the ward saboteur and the name behind Filch, but the hearing, the letters, the plans that had been building since October. The silence after was long. "Merlin," Ron said. "That's," Neville started, then stopped. Then started again, more quietly, "that explains a lot of things. About the way the families were, about what happened to some of the old alliances. If someone's been quietly working on this for years, longer than years," Harry said. "The earliest degradation is over 5 years old. Pre-Hogwarts for all of us." "The hearing," Hermione said, in the tone of someone moving immediately to the practical. "You're sure the filing is clean?" "The Wisengamot has very specific procedures for hereditary claims. There are 17 different procedural requirements for a true custodian formal appearance. Fawcett's handling the filing," Harry said. "Ragnarok has been building the evidentiary case for 3 years. The documentation is solid." He looked at Hermione. "I need your help with something else." "Name it." "The Wisengamot session will be public record. But there are members of the Wisengamot who have specific interests in keeping the current arrangement, Hogwarts under Board of Governors oversight, the founder inheritance claims unrecognized. Several of them have been benefiting from the ambiguity for decades." He spread a piece of parchment on the table, a list of names. I need to understand each of these people's positions, their connections, their public record. Not to manipulate them. To understand what I'm walking into. Hermione looked at the list and then at him, and he could see her working through the ethics of it rapidly, because she always did. She was not someone who went along with things because she trusted the person asking, she was someone who thought it through and then decided, and her decision was always informed. Research, she said. Not strategy. Research that informs strategy, he said honestly. You decide how much of the strategy you want to be part of. She considered this for approximately 4 seconds. All of it, she said, and picked up her quill. The Wisengamot hearing was scheduled for the 21st of December. Harry had 2 weeks. He used them. The ward nodes were fully restored by mid-December, repaired quietly over a series of nights with the castle's guidance. Harry told Dumbledore about Filch, not about who had given Filch his instructions, not yet, just that the mechanism had been identified and resolved and that the full picture would be presented at the hearing. Dumbledore received this with the controlled expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by Harry Potter's scope of operation and was adapting to it with the fluid grace of a supremely experienced strategist. Dumbledore did not ask who was behind Filch. The fact that he didn't ask told Harry a great deal. He prepared his testimony with Fawcett, a brisk woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and handled legal documents with the reverence of a master craftsperson for their tools. She reviewed his evidence, his documentation, the Gringotts certification, the architectural analysis, the ward degradation records, and said, on their first meeting, "This is extraordinary." "Is it sufficient?" Harry asked. "It is devastating," she said, with the particular pleasure of a solicitor seeing a very good case. "You've done everything correctly. The hereditary claim is incontrovertible. The Anchor Stone certification predates every current governance arrangement for Hogwarts by several centuries. The true custodian legal standing is recognized under the original charter, which has never been repealed because no one thought it would ever apply." She looked at him over her glasses. "How old are you?" 11, Harry said. "Remarkable," she said. "Now. The Wisengamot will attempt 4 specific challenges. Let's go through each one." They went through each one. She was sharp and thorough and direct, and she listened when Harry pushed back on her framing of the hereditary argument, which she initially presented in the traditional pure-blood terms that Harry found both inaccurate and tactically limiting. "The claim doesn't rest on pure-blood status," he said. "It rests on documented magical convergence recognized by an independent magical artifact, the Anchor Stone. The bloodline isn't the point. The recognition is." She looked at him. "That's a better argument," she said. "It's also true," Harry said. "Truth and good argument are often the same thing," she said. "Not always, but often." She made a note. "You'll do well." He flew in the Gryffindor vs. Slytherin match on December 15th. It was, objectively, not the most important thing happening in Harry's life. It was also, in the specific calculus of being 11 years old and having been deprived of most of the normal forms of joy for the first 8 years of said life, enormously important in a different way. He was up on a broom in the Scottish winter sky with the lake below him and the castle's towers on his left and the whole enormous scope of the game spread out beneath him, and for 90 minutes nothing existed except the cold air and the snitch and the specific electric focus of sport. He found the snitch at the 40-minute mark, diving from 60 feet with the Slytherin seeker in close pursuit, pulling out at the last possible second with his fingers closed around the tiny gold ball, and the roar from the stands was the loudest thing he'd ever heard, and he pulled up into the clear cold sky and held the snitch above his head, and the castle's warmth was there even from up here, even at this height. A constant thread back to the earth. In the stands, the Slytherin section was silent. Except for Draco Malfoy, who, after a moment, started clapping. Not enthusiastically, a controlled, measured applause, the kind given by someone who has decided that acknowledging skill is more important than denying it. He caught Harry's eye when Harry came down to the ground. He gave a single nod. Harry gave one back. That was all. But it was a beginning. After the match, in the changing rooms, Wood was doing a victory speech that involved a significant amount of Scottish emotion and several references to the cup, and Harry let it wash over him with genuine warmth and thought about the hearing in 6 days and the 3 letters he'd sent and the thing Dumbledore didn't know he knew yet. Ron appeared in the doorway of the changing rooms, technically off-limits, but he'd been here before and the team tolerated him because he was good at post-match tactical analysis. "You're going to be incredible in the spring matches," Ron said. "The Ravenclaw Seeker is fast but she overcommits on feints. You'd have her in 20 minutes. "We'll see," Harry said, toweling his hair dry. "You're thinking about the hearing," Ron said, not accusatorially, just observationally. "A bit," Harry admitted. "What happens if it goes wrong?" Harry looked at him. "Define wrong." "If they don't accept the claim. If the Wisengamot decides to contest it. Then we contest back," Harry said simply. "The documentation is solid. The Anchor Stone certification is the strongest magical evidence available. They can delay it, they can argue procedure, but they can't make the magic untrue." He pulled his jumper on. "They can't unglow the stone." Ron sat on the bench. "And the thing behind Filch, that comes out at the hearing," Harry said. "All of it. That's the point. Are you nervous?" Ron asked, with the directness of someone who doesn't dress things up. "A bit," Harry said again, because it was true and Ron deserved truth. "Good," Ron said, surprising him. "You should be a bit nervous. It means you know it's real." He stood up, hands in his pockets. "Fred and George have a bet going." "On what happens at the hearing?" "Fred says you'll be recognized in under 2 hours and George says you'll be recognized in under 1 hour and he has 5 sickles on it. Which one do you agree with?" "Neither," Ron said. "I think they recognize it immediately and spend the rest of the time arguing about what it means, which is different." He grinned. "I have 7 sickles on that." Harry laughed. Genuinely, fully, the way he was still learning to do, laughter that didn't have the habit of checking over its shoulder first. 7 sickles, he said. Bold. "I have a good read on complicated situations," Ron said, with dignity, and went back out to the grounds. The hearing was in 2 days when the second development Harry had been tracking arrived, in the form of a conversation he hadn't been meant to hear. He was in the hidden library, late, after the rest of the castle was asleep, reading a Founder-era text on the legal precedents for true custodian authority, preparation for the hearing, when the castle showed him something. Not dramatically, a warmth along a specific wall, a direction, the particular pull that meant listen here. He moved to the wall and it was thinner than stone should be, and through it, in the passage on the other side, 2 voices. He knew both of them. He pressed his back against the wall and listened, and what he heard was worse and better than he'd expected in different proportions, worse because the confirmation was awful, better because it was complete, and completeness was what he needed. He went back to his table and added 3 lines to the notes for the hearing. Then he opened Helga Hufflepuff's personal journal, which had been in the 3rd shelf of the archive and which he'd been reading in stages over the past 2 months, and found the passage he'd bookmarked about the original intentions of the Founder's governance structure, the part about what the true custodian was meant to do in a crisis, and he read it again, slowly, making sure he had it exactly. Helga's handwriting was round and clear and she had, apparently, genuinely made tea during arguments. Her journal was full of affectionate exasperation at the other 3 and very precise thinking about institutional design, and Harry liked her enormously on the basis of it. She had written, in the 3rd year of Hogwarts' existence, the custodian must not only protect the castle but the people within it. A school is its students first. Its stones second. Anyone who inverts this order has misunderstood the point. Harry read it a second time. Then he closed the journal and sat in the quiet library with the softly glowing archive crystals around him and the stars cycling slowly in the floor and thought about the people within the castle, and the order of things, and what he was going to do in 2 days. The castle was warm around him. It knew what he was preparing. It had been waiting, in its geological way, for this moment for a long time, and the warmth of its attention was not pressure but support, the specific support of something that trusts you to do what you said you would. He packed his books. He checked his notes. He went to bed. The morning of the hearing, he ate breakfast in the great hall with his 3 friends around him and the December light coming cold and clear through the tall windows, and the castle was all around him, and everything was in order. He was ready. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The Wizengamot chamber was older than most wizards remembered. It sat beneath the Ministry of Magic in a space that predated the ministry itself by 4 centuries, a circular room of dark stone with tiered seating rising in concentric rings around a central floor that was worn smooth by the boots of everyone who had ever stood on it and been judged or been judging. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The walls held the accumulated weight of every significant legal decision in Wizarding Britain since the 13th century, and the room knew it, in the same way Hogwarts knew its own history, not sentient exactly, but saturated, dense with consequence. Harry had read about it. Reading about it was not the same as standing in it at 8 in the morning on the 21st of December with Fawcett at his left shoulder and Ragnarok at his right and 73 Wizengamot members filing into their seats above him. He looked around the chamber once, taking it in with the same focused attention he gave everything, and then he looked forward and was done with being impressed. Impressiveness was not the point. The point was the stack of documents in Fawcett's case and the 3 lines he'd added to his notes 4 nights ago and what happened when all of it was put in front of 73 people who had a great deal of invested interest in the current arrangement remaining unchanged. Dumbledore was in the chamber. He was seated in the Chief Warlock's chair at the head of the raised judicial bench, which was his official function and his right, and he met Harry's eyes when Harry came in with an expression that was complicated in ways Harry had learned to read over the past 3 months. There was genuine affection in it, which Harry trusted as real. There was concern, which was also real. And underneath both, watching, calculating, the expression of a man who was not certain what was about to happen and found the uncertainty profoundly uncomfortable. Harry gave him a small nod. Dumbledore returned it. Fawcett leaned close and said, quietly, "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. "When they challenge the age question, don't argue the law. We've already won the law. Argue the fact." "I know. And when Umbridge starts, I'll handle Umbridge," Harry said. Fawcett looked at him, assessed him, and said, "Yes. I believe you will." The session opened with the procedural formalities that Fawcett had walked him through, the calling of the session, the acknowledgement of parties, the formal reading of the petition. A clerk read the filing in the measured tone of official record-keeping, and Harry listened to his own case being described in legal language and found it strange the way it is always strange to hear yourself described from the outside. Harrison James Potter, claimant, petition for formal recognition of true custodian status under the Hogwarts Charter of 980 AD, supported by Gringotts Bank certification of founder inheritance convergence dated July 28, 1991, and the activation record of the Anchor Stone of Hogwarts, as witnessed and certified by Senior Account Manager Ragnarok of Gringotts. It went on for 4 minutes. The chamber was very quiet. 73 witches and wizards in plum robes listened with the variety of expressions that a genuinely unprecedented legal situation produces: skepticism, interest, alarm, the careful blankness of people who have not yet decided which side of a thing they're on. "The petitioner may address the chamber," Dumbledore said, when the clerk finished. Harry stepped forward. He was wearing proper robes, good ones, not the hand-me-down approximation of his first months, in dark green with the Potter crest at the lapel. He had his notes but he didn't look at them. He had been through this enough times in his head that the notes were a formality. He stood in the worn center of the ancient floor and looked at the tiered seating and spoke clearly and without preamble. "The petition is exactly what it says it is," he said. "The documentation is in your copies. I'll go through the legal basis briefly and then I want to move to something more immediate, because I think the legal question is actually the less urgent one." He paused, let that register. Several faces shifted. The Hogwarts Charter of 980 AD establishes the office of true custodian and defines its authority clearly. The Anchor Stone is the independent magical mechanism by which that authority is recognized and transferred. It is not subject to ministry interpretation, Board of Governors agreement, or Wiesengemot vote. It is a 1,000-year-old magical artifact that responded to my bloodline on July 28 of this year and has been glowing in a Gringotts vault ever since. Ragnarok will speak to that directly if the chamber requires it. Ragnarok, from his position to Harry's right, inclined his head. The inheritance convergence is documented at 4 lines. Potter to Gryffindor through the Peveril connection, documented in Gringotts genealogical records dating to the 14th century. Evans to Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw through a suppressed lineage from 16th century Somerset, documented in pre-ministry records that Gringotts has held since their deposit in 1583. Potter maternal line to Slytherin through a disowned Gaunt branch, documented in the same genealogical archive. He kept his pace even, not rushing, not performing. Just stating. Any one of these would be a notable historical finding. All 4 in a single individual is the legal basis for the true custodian claim, and the Anchor Stone's response is the magical confirmation that the legal basis is correct. He stopped. Let that sit. A woman in the upper tier, Dolores Umbridge, whom Harry had identified from photographs and who had the specific quality of someone whose surface sweetness was a management strategy for a core that was neither sweet nor warm, raised her hand with a smile that could have been painted on a wall in a school for children. "If I may," she said, in a voice like pink frosting, "the petitioner is 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "Surely we can agree that a child cannot, the true custodian claim has no age requirement," Harry said. "It has a bloodline requirement and a magical recognition requirement, both of which I meet. Age is not a criterion in the Charter, and adding it retroactively would require the Wiesengemot to amend a document it does not have the authority to amend, since the Charter predates the Wiesengemot's own founding by approximately 2 centuries. He looked at her steadily. "Is there a specific provision you'd like to cite, Madam Umbridge?" "I'm happy to address it." Umbridge's smile held for a moment and then recalculated. "The matter of governance," she said, pivoting with the practiced ease of someone who has multiple prepared positions. "Even if the claim were recognized, a child cannot be expected to actually administer. I'm not asking to administer the school," Harry said. "I'm asking for legal recognition of what is already magically true. What I do with that recognition is my business and the castle's." He paused. "Which is, incidentally, how the Charter describes it." Someone in the middle tier made a short sound that might have been a laugh suppressed. The debate went on for 2 hours. Fawcett handled the procedural challenges with the efficiency of someone who had prepared extensively for exactly these challenges, and Harry handled the substantive ones, the questions that required someone to know the material, to think on their feet, to respond to arguments that were sometimes genuinely good and sometimes politically motivated and required different approaches. The chamber had its rhythm: challenge, response, counter, clarification. Harry followed it without difficulty and kept his own pace, refusing to be hurried or rattled by the ones who were trying to hurry or rattle him. Marcus Flint's father attempted a lineage challenge, arguing that the Slytherin connection was too diluted to count. Ragnarok demolished this in precisely 2 sentences, citing the specific magical recognition mechanism that made dilution irrelevant. Lord Flint sat down. A representative from the Department of Magical Education tried to argue that true custodian status, even if recognized, was superseded by the 1842 Education Act, which established ministry oversight of Hogwarts. Fawcett had a 20-page brief on this specific point that she handed to the clerk with quiet satisfaction. The Education Act had been passed under the assumption that no living true custodian existed. It contained an explicit carve-out for that eventuality in Section 12, Paragraph 4. The representative from the Department of Magical Education had clearly not read Section 12, Paragraph 4. Dumbledore watched all of this from the Chief Warlock's chair with an expression that was doing several things at once. Harry caught his eye twice during the proceedings, and both times the expression was the same: you have done this carefully and well, and I am not going to stand against it, and I am also not certain how I feel about that, and I am choosing to resolve that uncertainty in your favor, and I suspect I am correct to do so." At the 2-hour mark, during a short recess, Fawcett said quietly, "They're going to recognize it. The procedural challenges have all failed. They're building up to the formal vote." She paused. "The ward matter, now," Harry said. She looked at him. "The recess is almost over." "Good timing, then," Harry said, and walked back to the center floor. When the session reconvened, Harry spoke before Dumbledore could call the vote. "Before the recognition vote," he said, "I want to raise a matter that falls under true custodian authority regardless of whether that authority is formally recognized today, because it pertains to the safety of the castle and its students, which is not contingent on a vote." He looked at the tiered seating. "Someone has been systematically degrading Hogwarts' protective ward architecture for at least 5 years. 23 ward nodes across the castle's northern and eastern sections have been mechanically disrupted using a tool-based methodology that allows a non-magical person to produce a magical effect without triggering standard monitoring charms. The person performing the physical disruptions is Argus Filch, the school's caretaker. The person who taught Filch the technique, provided him with the tool, and directed the specific nodes to be targeted." He paused, the specific pause of someone about to say something that cannot be unsaid, "is Lucius Malfoy." The chamber went up. Not all at once, it was more like a wave, starting at the places where the name had the most history and radiating outward. Several voices simultaneously. Umbridge's expression snapped from management smile to something colder. Several members of the Board of Governors faction who sat in the Wisengamot gallery above the floor went very still. Lord Flint, who had sat back down after his lineage challenge, stood up again. Harry waited for the noise to settle without moving. He had the specific stillness of someone who has said something explosive and is neither retreating from it nor escalating it, just letting it exist. Dumbledore said, quietly but with the carrying quality of a voice that had controlled rooms for 60 years, "Order." And the noise settled. "The evidence," Dumbledore said, looking at Harry. "In Fawcett's secondary case," Harry said. Fawcett placed the second document folder on the clerk's table. "The tool used on the ward nodes was recovered from Filch's office 5 days ago, with the castle's assistance. It's a Muggle locksmith instrument modified with a specific enchantment. The enchantment signature matches the magical fingerprint of an object known to be associated with the Malfoy estate, documented in a Gringotts asset record from 1987. He kept his voice even. Filch's financial records, which Gringotts holds, since Hogwarts staff bank through them, show 8 payments over 5 years from an account traceable to a Malfoy business subsidiary. The payments correspond precisely to the timeline of the ward degradations." "This is," Lord Flint started. "Lord Flint," Harry said, turning to look at him directly, "your son plays Quidditch against me on Saturdays. I have no issue with the Flint family. Please don't make this personal on his behalf." Lord Flint sat down a second time, this time with less grace. "Lucius Malfoy is a member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors," Harry said, turning back to the chamber. "He has used that position, and a proxy agent within the school, to weaken the castle's defenses in a specific pattern, a vulnerability zone encompassing the third-floor corridor, where a significant magical object was housed this term. I have reason to believe the ward degradation was preparation for an access attempt, and that Malfoy's interest in said object is connected to a," he stopped, choosing his next words carefully, "a prior allegiance." The silence this time was different. Heavier. "I'm not going to speculate further on that connection today," Harry said. "Because that's a separate investigation and I don't have complete evidence for it yet, and I am not willing to make claims I can't fully support. What I can support is the ward sabotage, fully, with documentation." He looked at Dumbledore. "I'd request that the Board of Governors membership be reviewed pending investigation, and specifically that Lucius Malfoy's seat be suspended." Dumbledore met his eyes. In the Chief Warlock's chair, with the full chamber around them and the weight of everything that had just been said between them, something passed across the headmaster's face that was beyond calculation, something more like the expression of a man who has been moving pieces around a board for 40 years and has just watched someone else clear the board entirely with a move he didn't see coming and which is, unambiguously, correct. "The matter will be investigated," Dumbledore said. "Formally. I will personally ensure. I'd prefer a formal Wisengamot committee," Harry said, pleasantly. "Given the Board of Governors connection. Independence is cleaner." A pause. Several Wisengamot members, the ones whose interest in the current arrangement was not specifically tied to Malfoy, were nodding. The political geometry of the chamber had shifted and everyone who was good at reading rooms knew it. "Agreed," Dumbledore said, and the word carried weight, and Harry accepted it with a nod, and that was that. The recognition vote was formal and swift, the procedural challenges exhausted, the chamber moved through by the accumulated momentum of a 2-hour argument that had resolved itself clearly. 61 in favor. 9 opposed. 3 abstentions. The true custodian status of Harrison James Potter was formally and legally recognized by the Wisengamot of Great Britain at 12:47 on the 21st of December, 1991. Fawcett said, very quietly, "Congratulations, Lord Potter." Harry said, "Thank you. What's next on the list?" She produced the list. It was not short. The next 2 hours were the machinery part, the formal notation, the legal filing, the registration with the Department of Magical Records, the specific instruments that transferred formal custodial acknowledgement from the Board of Governors' administrative umbrella to Harry's direct authority. Dumbledore signed 3 documents. The Board of Governors representative signed 2 with the expression of someone swallowing something unpleasant and choosing to swallow it quickly. Ragnarok countersigned everything with the gravity of a being for whom document integrity is a genuine moral value. Harry signed where he was told to sign and read everything before he signed it, which took longer than people expected and which he did not apologize for. At the end of it, when the chamber was thinning out and Fawcett was packing her case and Ragnarok was doing the goblin equivalent of satisfied, a very slight relaxation in the habitual severity, Harry turned to Ragnarok and said, "The other matter." Ragnarok looked at him. "Today?" "Today," Harry said. The other matter was Sirius Black. Harry had known about Sirius Black since October, when the Founders' Archive had turned up a series of documents that shouldn't have been possible to find and which Ragnarok had been able to partially verify through Gringotts' own records. The picture they assembled was not a comfortable one. It was the picture of a man who had been sent to Azkaban in 1981 without a trial, without any trial, without a hearing, without the basic procedural rights that the Wisengamot was supposed to guarantee every accused person regardless of the severity of the charge. Sirius Orion Black, formerly Harry's godfather, had been imprisoned for 10 years on the basis of Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s executive decision and nothing else. Harry had spent 2 months being certain before he was willing to move on it, because being wrong here was a different category of wrong than being wrong about a ward node or a Gringotts document. He had Ragnarok's investigative report. He had the Gringotts records showing that Sirius had never been formally charged, that no trial transcript existed because no trial had occurred, that Crouch had invoked a wartime emergency provision that had a strict 6-month expiration which had never been honored. He had 2 testimonies from ministry employees who had been present in 1981 and had raised concerns that were suppressed. He had, most importantly, the memory of a conversation he'd heard through the wall of the hidden library 4 nights ago, 2 voices, one of which he'd recognized as belonging to someone with detailed knowledge of the 1981 arrests, confirming, in what they believed was private, that Black's imprisonment had been political as much as evidential. He had everything he needed and he had been sitting on it for 2 months waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was now, while the chamber was still in session and the formal mechanisms were still active, and the Wisengamot had just demonstrated, in the past 2 hours, that it was capable of following the law when the law was presented to it completely and correctly. He filed the formal petition for review of Sirius Black's imprisonment as the last item of the session, and the chamber, which had been preparing to adjourn, went still again. Fawcett presented the procedural basis. Harry let her. This one was hers to lead because the legal argument was the point, not the personal connection, and the legal argument was excellent. The objections were immediate and several. Crouch, no longer head of magical law enforcement, now head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, was not present, but his proxies were, and they were vocal. Emergency wartime provision. Threat level. Evidence of guilt. Evidence of guilt that was never presented to a trial, Fawcett said, in the cool precise tone of a person who has been waiting a long time to say this in an official forum. Because there was no trial. This is not disputed. The trial record is empty because no trial occurred. Wisengamot law is explicit. No witch or wizard imprisoned for longer than 6 months without trial must be held without a formal hearing. Sirius Black has been imprisoned for 10 years. She paused. If the law applies to everyone, it applies to Sirius Black. If it doesn't apply to Sirius Black, you should say so clearly, on the record, today, so we all understand what kind of legal system we're actually working with. The silence after this was extremely thorough. Dumbledore, in the Chief Warlock's chair, had not moved for some time. He had the expression of a man doing a very specific internal accounting, the kind where you identify things you should have done and didn't, and decide, belatedly, to do them now. The petition for formal review is accepted, he said. A hearing will be scheduled within 30 days. With respect, Harry said, from the floor, I'd request a hearing before the end of the month. Azkaban is, he stopped, chose his words, not conducive to long waits. The chamber went quiet in a different way. The specific discomfort of people who have not thought about what they send people to and are now being asked to think about it. Before the end of the month, Dumbledore said. Thank you, Harry said. Outside the chamber, in the corridor that led back up to the Ministry's main levels, Harry sat on a bench against the wall and was, for the first time all day, still. Not tired exactly. More the feeling of something large that had been moving for a long time becoming briefly motionless. Fawcett was at the other end of the corridor making notes. Ragnarok was standing nearby with the posture of someone who is standing nearby specifically to be present without intruding, which Harry had come to recognize as Ragnarok's version of support. After a moment Ragnarok said, "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it. Like I moved a lot of things that needed moving, he said. And now I have to wait and see where they land. That is, in my experience, precisely correct, Ragnarok said. The Sirius Black matter. You understand it may take time regardless of the hearing. I know. And there is no guarantee of the outcome. I know. But there's a chance now, and there wasn't one before today, and that's what today was for. Harry looked at the ancient stone wall of the Ministry corridor, not so different from the stone of Hogwarts though colder, less warm, the stone of a bureaucracy rather than a home. One thing at a time. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. You did well, he said. Very well. Fawcett did most of the procedure. Fawcett is an excellent solicitor, Ragnarok agreed. She also works with many clients who know their own case as well as you know yours. You are the first. Harry looked at him. Did you know? When I was 8, in the vault. Did you know it would go like this? Ragnarok considered this seriously, which Harry appreciated. The goblin did not give comfortable answers as a courtesy. I knew you were extraordinary, he said. I knew the case was extraordinary. I did not know what you would do with it. A pause. I am glad to have been wrong in the direction of more rather than less. Harry almost smiled. That's a very goblin way of saying you're pleased. Yes, Ragnarok said, without embarrassment. It is. He was back at Hogwarts by 4 in the afternoon. The castle received him the way it always did, warmth through the floor, the torches a degree brighter, the specific ease of a building that adjusts itself for the person it's built for. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment with his bag and his notes and the quiet satisfaction of a day that had gone as planned, and let the castle settle around him. Hermione was in the entrance hall. Neville was beside her, and Ron was slightly behind, and all three of them were wearing the expressions of people who have been waiting for something all day and have reached the limit of productive activity and have fallen back on simply waiting. Hermione looked at him. He gave her the smallest nod. Her shoulders dropped an inch with relief and she said, "Controlled, the recognition? 61-9. The ward matter? Referred to formal committee. Malfoy's board seat suspended pending investigation. She processed this in 2 seconds. The other thing? The thing you wouldn't tell us in advance? Sirius Black's case gets a hearing. Before the end of the month." Hermione's expression did something complicated and complete. Neville said, quietly, "Oh," in the tone of someone for whom this particular piece of justice has a specific weight. Ron said nothing for a moment, and then, "Your dad's best friend." "Yes," Harry said. "He was there for you. In the will." He was supposed to raise me," Harry said. "Yes." Ron was quiet for a moment, doing what Ron did, cutting past the elaborate framing to the simple thing. "That's the one that matters most. Isn't it?" "Today it is," Harry said honestly. Ron nodded. He put his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder and then dropped it with the slightly self-conscious embarrassment of someone who expresses affection physically and is still working out how often that's welcome. Harry let it stay the full beat it needed. "Right," Ron said. "Are you hungry?" "Because I am, and the elves have left sandwiches in the common room and I've been sitting on them for 2 hours out of restraint and I would very much like to stop." Harry laughed. The same genuine laughter from the changing rooms, easy now, practiced into habit. "Yes," he said. "Let's go." They were in the Gryffindor common room with the sandwiches and the fire and the Christmas decorations that McGonagall had charmed onto the walls, and Hermione was asking questions, properly now, in the mode of someone who had been waiting to debrief for 6 hours and had very specific things she needed to understand, and Harry was answering, and Neville was listening with the focused attention that was his version of enthusiasm, and Ron was eating with the focus of someone for whom food is a legitimate pleasure that doesn't require justification. "The Board of Governors," Hermione said. "If Malfoy's suspended, who holds the balance?" "Right now, the remaining 11 members. They tend to split roughly 6-5 on most major issues. Without Malfoy the dynamics change. The 4 members who voted with him primarily out of social pressure will reorient." Harry poured himself a cup of tea from the pot Hermione had made with her wand, which she could do now consistently and with impressive control. "I'm not interested in controlling the board. I want it functional and reasonably independent. The true custodian authority is a last resort, not an administrative role." "Helga Hufflepuff's principal," Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He went slightly pink but didn't retreat from the point. "The school is its students first. It's stones second." He'd been reading the journals too, the copies Harry had made from the archive. "You're not trying to run the school. You're trying to make sure it's run correctly." "Exactly," Harry said. "There's a difference," Hermione said, the note in her voice that meant she'd been thinking about this and wanted to say it. "Between authority and administration. You're claiming the first without taking over the second." "Because the second would take over my entire life and I'm 11, Harry said. Ron made a sound of agreement through a sandwich. "Also because Dumbledore is genuinely good at the second," Harry said, which was true, and fair, and worth saying. "When he's not being strategic about it, he runs an extraordinary school. I'm not trying to replace him." "You're changing the terms under which he operates," Hermione said. "Yes. He knows that. He does. He also knows that the terms are better. Harder for him, but better." Harry set his cup down. "He made decisions for me for 10 years without my knowledge or consent, including one that put me in a cupboard. He knows I know that. What he's deciding, I think, is whether the version of the story where he course corrects is one he can live with." "And can he?" Neville asked. I think so, Harry said. He's a man who loves being right, but he also, underneath it, loves the work. The actual work, teaching, protecting, building something that outlasts him. If I make it possible for him to do the work without the management structure he built around himself, I think he'll find it, eventually, a relief. He paused. I could be wrong. But that's my read of him. It's a generous read, Hermione said. He's a complicated person, Harry said. Not a villain. Complicated. He looked at the fire. I have a lot of complicated people to deal with going forward. Malfoy, Lucius, not Draco, will fight the board investigation. Voldemort is still out there in whatever form he survives in. The ward damage will take time to fully restore. The political implications of the Wizengamot recognition will take months to settle. He was quiet for a moment. There's a lot still to do. There's always a lot still to do, Ron said philosophically, reaching for another sandwich. That's just life, isn't it? Harry looked at him. Is that supposed to be comforting? A bit, yeah. It is, actually. The fire crackled. Outside the tower windows the December sky was doing its early dark, the Scottish winter pressing in, and the castle was warm around them in all the specific ways Harry had learned, the floor's subtle pulse, the portrait of the young Gryffindor student from the 1300s who had started waving at Harry every time he passed, the comfortable solidity of old stone that knew who it belonged to. Neville said, after a while, do you ever think about what would have happened if Mrs. Fig hadn't taken you to Gringotts? Harry thought about it seriously. Yes. I think Dumbledore's plan would have played out. I'd have come to Hogwarts knowing nothing. The Sorting Hat would have put me in Gryffindor without the announcement. I'd have found out I was famous, been overwhelmed by it, latched onto the first kind person, probably Hagrid, and spent the first few years grateful and slightly lost. He paused. Voldemort would still have been in the school. The stone situation would probably have ended roughly the same way but with much higher stakes because I wouldn't have had 3 years of preparation. Sirius would still be in Azkaban. He looked at the fire. And the ward sabotage would have continued, and at some point the castle's protections would have failed badly enough for something genuinely catastrophic to get through. The room was quiet. So Mrs. Fig saved you, Ron said. Mrs. Fig, and a guilty conscience, and whoever sent her that anonymous tip, Harry said. Who was it? Neville asked. Harry smiled, slightly. I have a theory, he said. But it requires evidence and I don't have it yet. Put it this way, there are very few people who knew enough about my situation and the Gringotts inheritance procedure to know what the visit would produce. And there's one person who would have been in the position to arrange it and would have had an excellent reason to, he paused, start correcting a mistake. Dumbledore, Hermione said. I don't know, Harry said honestly. Maybe. Or someone close to him who saw what he couldn't see because he was too close to his own plan. He shrugged. One more thing on the list. The list, Hermione said. She had a notebook open, because she had been taking notes on the entire conversation with the recording instinct of someone who knows that the present moment has historical significance. What's first? Harry looked around the room, at Hermione with her notebook and her open intelligence and her absolute refusal to be less than she was, at Neville whose quiet courage had been growing visibly since September like something given the right soil, at Ron who had 7 sickles on the right outcome and was usually right about complicated things because he didn't overcomplicate them. The fire. The old stone. The warmth that had no source except the building itself, vast and particular and entirely his. Sirius, he said. First, always, until he's out. The hearing was scheduled for the 28th of December. Harry was there with Fawcett and Ragnarok and 3 witnesses and 6 pieces of documentary evidence and the Wizengamot procedural record showing clearly that no trial had occurred, and the outcome was not certain. These things were never certain, but the case was as complete as it could be made and the people making it were not going to stop until it was done. In Azkaban, presumably, Sirius Black had no way of knowing any of this was happening. He had been there for 10 years and had no reason to expect anything would change, and Harry thought about this sometimes in the way you think about things you can't fix from a distance, with the specific frustration of knowing what's wrong and not being able to immediately right it. But he was trying. And the mechanisms were in motion. And the Wizengamot, faced with the plain fact of a man imprisoned without trial for a decade, voted 38 to 29 with 6 abstentions to schedule a formal hearing with full evidence review. It wasn't freedom yet. But it was the door. And doors, Harry had learned at age 8 from a goblin in a deep stone vault, were not the hard part. The hard part was knowing which ones to open and having the nerve to do it. The hard part, he had also been finding out for the past 3 years, was something he was rather good at. He was back at Hogwarts on the 29th, and the castle received him with the full warmth of a home that had been waiting, and he walked through the entrance hall and up the main staircase and through the corridors he had been dreaming for 3 years before he ever walked them, and every stone knew him and he knew every stone, and the warmth ran through the building like a current through a wire, steady and continuous and sure. In the Ravenclaw archive, in the room with the cycling stars, he sat at Rowena's desk and opened the founder journal he'd been working through, Godric's, this time, cramped and bold and frequently funny in unexpected ways, and read for an hour in the specific silence of a room that had been built for exactly this purpose by someone who had understood, 1,000 years ago, that the heir who came would need the things they left. He was 11 years old. He had a castle and 4 inheritances and a legal recognition and the beginnings of a case that might, if it went right, put his godfather in a position to be something other than a prisoner. He had 3 friends who knew the whole truth and were still there, and 1 goblin who had been waiting for him since July 28, 1991 and had turned out to be worth every year of the waiting. He had Voldemort still out there somewhere, formless and furious and not finished, which was a problem for the future but not a problem he was afraid of. He had a ward repair project that would take the rest of the year and a political landscape that would take longer and a Wizengamot that had recognized him and would spend the next decade figuring out what that meant. He had Helga Hufflepuff's principle. The school is its students first, its stones second. He had work to do. He turned the page, and read.